The dust never settled in Black Cinder. It hung in the air like something living, coating the wooden sidewalks and the faces of people who'd learned to keep their heads down. The town sat in a valley between two ridges of rock that turned red when the sun dropped low, and on good days, back when there were good days, it looked almost beautiful. But that was before Vernon Hale decided he wanted it. Now it just looked tired. Colt Mercer had ridden in 3 days earlier with no particular destination in mind, which was how he preferred things. He'd been drifting for the better part of 5 years, ever since the war ended and home stopped feeling like a place worth returning to. Black Cinder was supposed to be a one-night stop. Get a meal, sleep in a bed that didn't move, and disappear before anyone started asking questions about the scars on his knuckles or the way his eyes never quite relaxed. But then he'd seen the way people moved through the streets, like prey. He'd noticed it first at the general store, where the clerk's hands shook while making change. Then at the saloon, where conversations died the moment the door opened. And finally at the livery stable, where the owner, a gray-haired man with shoulders like a bull, had flinched when Colt asked about boarding his horse for an extra day. "You don't want to stay here, mister," the stableman had muttered, eyes on the straw-covered floor. "This town ain't safe for strangers who ask questions." Colt hadn't asked questions. He'd simply noticed, and now sitting on the porch outside Dutch Kellerman's barber shop with his boots propped on the railing and his hat pulled low, he was noticing something else. 4 men on horseback were riding slowly down Main Street, and the entire town was vanishing. Doors closed, curtains drew shut. A woman herding 2 small children grabbed them by their collars and yanked them into an alley. The riders moved with the easy arrogance of men who knew no one would challenge them, their hands resting on their gun belts, their eyes scanning the storefronts like wolves selecting prey. Colt recognized the type. He'd fought alongside men like that during the war, men who discovered they enjoyed killing and never quite figured out how to stop. The war had ended, but for some people, it never really finished. The riders stopped in front of a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Carter and Son Trading Post." The lead rider dismounted, a thick-necked man with a beard that didn't quite hide the knife scar running down his jaw. He stepped onto the wooden walkway and kicked the door open without bothering to knock. Colt heard a woman's voice from inside, sharp with fear trying to sound like anger. "You got no right." "We got every right, ma'am," the scarred man's voice carried across the street, lazy and amused. "Your husband signed papers before he died. You got debts you ain't paid. That means this place belongs to Mr. Hale now. Those papers are lies, and you know it. Don't matter what I know. Matters what's written down legal." Colt lowered his boots from the railing. Behind him, the barbershop door cracked open. "Don't," Dutch whispered. The old barber's voice was tight with the kind of fear that came from watching good people get hurt and not being able to stop it. "They're Hale's men. You get involved, you won't leave this town alive." Colt didn't answer. He was watching the trading post entrance where 2 more of the riders had dismounted and disappeared inside. 30 seconds passed. Then a woman stumbled out onto the walkway, dragged by one arm. She was maybe 30, with dark hair coming loose from its pins and a dress that had been mended more than once. May Carter. Colt had heard her name mentioned at the saloon. Widow. 2 kids. Husband killed in a riding accident 6 months back, though the way people's voices dropped when they said accident suggested it had been anything but. Behind her came a boy, maybe 10 years old, his face red with tears and rage. "Let her go!" The kid's voice cracked, but he launched himself at the man holding his mother, small fists swinging wild. The scarred man backhanded him without looking. The boy hit the dirt hard, and May Carter made a sound like something breaking. "Touch him again, and I'll kill you," she said. And there was nothing soft in her voice now. Pure fury, the kind that made men nervous because it came from a place beyond fear. The scarred man smiled. "You ain't gonna do nothing, lady. None of you ever do." And that was when Colt stood up. He didn't make a show of it, didn't announce himself or reach for his gun. He simply stepped off the barbershop porch and walked into the middle of Main Street with the kind of deliberate calm that made people's instincts start screaming. The scarred man noticed him first. "This ain't your business, friend." Colt stopped about 20 feet away. "Didn't say it was." "Then keep walking." "Can't do that." The other 3 riders shifted in their saddles. Hands drifted toward gun belts. The math was simple and ugly. 4 armed men against one stranger who looked like he'd seen too many bad roads and not enough good meals. But something in the way Colt stood made them hesitate. He wasn't braced for a fight, wasn't tense or coiled. He just stood there with his arms loose at his sides, his coat pushed back enough to show the Colt Navy revolver on his hip, and his eyes flat and unreadable in the shadow of his hat brim. Men who'd survived real violence knew how to recognize it in others. And every one of Hale's riders could feel it coming off this stranger like heat from a forge. "You know who we work for?" the scarred man asked. "Don't care? Vernon Hale owns this town." "Nobody owns a town," Colt said quietly. "Just people who think they do until someone reminds them different." The scarred man's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward his gun, not drawing, just testing, seeing if the stranger would flinch. Colt didn't move at all. 5 seconds passed. 10. Somewhere down the street, a horse stamped its hoof. A shutter creaked. The wind pushed dust devils across the empty road. Then one of the mounted riders cleared his throat. "Ray," he said, addressing the scarred man, "maybe we come back later. With more boys." Ray's eyes never left Colt. "We got 4 guns right here." "Yeah." The mounted man's voice was tight. "And I'm thinking that might not be enough." May Carter was still on the ground, one arm around her son, staring at the stranger who'd just walked into the street like he had nothing to lose. The boy had stopped crying, his eyes wide. Ray took a step back, trying to make it look casual, like it was his idea. "This ain't finished, lady. You got 3 days to clear out. After that, we're taking what's ours." "It's not yours," May said, but her voice shook now that the immediate danger was passing and the fear was catching up. Ray ignored her. He climbed back onto his horse, his eyes still locked on Colt. "You just made a real bad mistake, friend." "Wouldn't be my first," Colt said. The 4 riders turned their horses and rode back down Main Street at a slow, deliberate pace, not fleeing, but not staying either. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, and Black Cinder held its breath. Then, slowly, doors started opening. May Carter got to her feet, pulling her son up with her. She looked at Colt like she couldn't quite decide if he was crazy or suicidal. "You just made an enemy of Vernon Hale," she said. "Seems that way. You don't understand. He'll come back. With more men. And next time I'll be here," Colt said simply. "Why?" The question came out raw. "You don't know me. Don't know this town. Why would you risk your neck for strangers?" Colt looked at her son, still clinging to his mother's dress with dirt on his face and defiance in his eyes. The kid reminded him of someone, maybe himself, 20 years ago, maybe his brother, maybe every boy who'd ever watched his family get pushed around and learned to swallow his rage because fighting back only made things worse. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago," Colt said. He tipped his hat and turned back toward the barber shop, leaving May standing in the street with her son and the eyes of an entire town watching from behind half-open doors. Dutch was waiting on the porch, his face pale. "You know what you just did?" the barber asked. "Stopped 4 men from hurting a woman and a kid." "You started a war." Colt climbed the steps and settled back into his chair. "Then I guess it's a war that needed starting." By sunset, the whole town knew the story. A stranger had faced down 4 of Hale's enforcers and made them back off without firing a shot. It didn't matter that nothing had been resolved, that May Carter was still 3 days away from losing her store, that Hale's men would return with reinforcements. What mattered was that for the first time in 2 years, someone had said no. And Black Cinder hadn't forgotten what that looked like. Colt ate dinner at the boarding house, a silent affair where the other guests kept glancing at him like he was a ghost who hadn't realized he was dead yet. The proprietor, a skeletal woman named Mrs. Calloway, served him stew without a word, but when she collected his bowl, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. He waited until he was back in his room to read it. "If you're still alive tomorrow, come to the Carter store after dark. We need to talk. MC." Colt burned the note in the lamp flame and watched the ash drift to the floor. He should leave. He knew that. Ride out tonight, be 50 miles gone by morning. Let Black Cinder solve its own problems. He'd played this part before in other towns, other territories, and it never ended well. The righteous stranger rides in, makes a stand, and either gets killed or becomes the new tyrant everyone fears. There was no third option. Except he kept seeing that boy's face, the way he'd thrown himself at a grown man twice his size because that man had put hands on his mother. The kind of stupid, hopeless bravery that got kids killed, but also kept the world from turning completely rotten. Colt had seen too many boys like that die during the war. So when full dark came and the streets emptied, he pulled on his coat, checked his gun, and walked to the Carter trading post. May was waiting for him in the back room past the shelves of dry goods and tools. A single lantern burned on a scarred wooden desk, casting long shadows. Her son wasn't there, probably upstairs sleeping or trying to. She looked different now, still scared, but the kind of scared that had calcified into something harder. Determination, maybe, or just the absence of alternatives. "You came," she said. "Said I would. Most men say a lot of things." She gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Colt sat. The chair creaked under his weight. May studied him for a long moment, like she was trying to read something written in a language she'd forgotten. "Who are you?" "Name's Colt Mercer." "That's not what I asked." He smiled despite himself. "Fair enough. I'm nobody. A drifter. Used to scout for the Union during the war, been moving ever since." "Why'd you help me today?" "Seemed like the right thing to do." People have been watching right things happen in this town for 2 years without lifting a finger. "Then they're cowards," Colt said flatly. "Or they're smart. Hard to say which." May's expression tightened. "You don't know what Hale's done to people who fought back. The rancher who contested his land claim? Found face down in the creek with a broken neck. The shopkeeper who reported him to the territorial marshal? His store burned down 3 days later. The deputy who tried to arrest one of Hale's men? Disappeared. Just gone. And nobody stopped him. The law didn't stop him. The law works for him now. Sheriff Ridley's drowning in whiskey and guilt, and the territorial authorities are 3 weeks' ride away. By the time they'd get here, there'd be nothing left to save." Colt leaned back, the chair groaning. "So what do you want from me, Mrs. Carter? I stopped 4 men from dragging you out of your store. That don't make me a savior." "I don't need a savior." May's voice went sharp. "I need someone who's not terrified, someone who can help me fight back." "Fight back how? You saw what happened today." "I got lucky. Next time Hale will send 8 men instead of 4. Then 12. Then 20. I'm good, but I'm not that good." May stood and moved to the back wall. She pried up a floorboard. Colt heard the nails squeak, and pulled out a leather satchel. When she returned to the desk, she dumped its contents in front of him. Papers. Dozens of them. Deeds, contracts, letters, receipts. "My husband wasn't just a shopkeeper," May said. "He was a clerk before we married, worked in land offices across 3 territories. He knew how to read legal documents, spot forgeries, trace ownership chains." She tapped one of the papers. "Before he died, he figured out what Hale's really doing." Colt picked up a deed at random. It looked official. Stamps, signatures, the whole performance. "What am I looking at?" "A lie. That signature belongs to a rancher named Thomas Whitmore, except Tom's been dead for 4 years. Vernon Hale bought his property from his widow, but the original deed says the land can't be sold outside the family for 20 years after purchase. It was part of a homestead grant, federal law." She pulled out another document. "This one's from the Sanderson Ranch. The family sold to Hale last year for $2,000. Except here," she showed him a bank ledger, "there's no record of any payment. The deed transfer happened, but no money changed hands." "Forged," Colt said. "All of it. My husband found 17 properties Hale claimed through fake debts, forged transfers, or outright threats. He was gathering evidence to send to the federal land office in Denver." May's voice dropped. "Then his horse spooked on a cliff trail. They found him at the bottom of a ravine with his neck broken." Colt set down the papers. "You think Hale killed him?" "I know Hale killed him. My husband told me 2 days before he died that someone had broken into the store. Nothing was stolen, but his files were disturbed. He knew they were on to him." Her hands were shaking now, but she kept her voice level. "He hid these copies where they wouldn't find them. And he made me promise that if something happened to him, I'd finish what he started." "By doing what? Sending these papers to Denver? You think that'll stop Hale?" "I think it's evidence. Real evidence. Not just rumors and whispers. If the federal land office sees this, they'll open an investigation that takes 6 months, Colt interrupted. Meanwhile, Hale's men burned this building to the ground with you and your son inside. You really think some bureaucrat 3 territories away cares more about your life than about paperwork? May's eyes flashed. Then what do you suggest? Roll over? Let him take everything my husband died protecting? I'm suggesting you're planning to get yourself killed for a stack of papers. These papers are proof he's a fraud. I don't doubt it. Colt stood, suddenly tired. But proof don't stop bullets, Mrs. Carter. And Hale's got more bullets than you got evidence. He moved toward the door, but May's voice stopped him. You're a coward after all. Colt turned back slowly. Excuse me? You heard me. She was standing now too, her whole body rigid with anger. You strut into the street and make yourself feel like a hero for 10 minutes. But the moment it gets complicated, the moment it requires more than just staring down some thugs, you run. I ain't running. I'm being realistic. You're being scared. Damn right I'm scared. The words came out harder than he'd intended, and May flinched. Colt took a breath, lowered his voice. I've fought in battles where good men died for causes that didn't matter. I've seen people throw their lives away for pride, for revenge, for pieces of dirt that nobody remembers 20 years later. You want to die for your husband's memory? Fine. But don't ask me to watch. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then May spoke, and her voice was so quiet he almost didn't hear it. I'm not asking you to watch. I'm asking you to help me make his death mean something. Colt looked at her, really looked, saw the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her shoulders wanted to collapse but wouldn't let themselves. Saw a woman who'd already lost everything that mattered and was now fighting for the only thing she had left, the belief that her husband hadn't died for nothing. He'd known that feeling once. After his brother died at Shiloh, Colt had spent 6 months trying to make the death mean something, anything, before he finally accepted that some deaths just happened and didn't mean a damn thing. But maybe that was his failure, not a universal truth. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. May gestured to the papers. We expose him, not just to the federal land office, but to everyone, the whole territory. Make it so public, so undeniable, that even Hale's bought and paid for politicians can't ignore it. How? I don't know yet. She met his eyes. But you stood in that street today like a man who's forgotten how to back down, so I'm betting you know how to fight smarter than just drawing a gun. Colt laughed, a short, bitter sound. You got a lot of faith in a stranger. I got no faith in anyone else. He looked down at the scattered documents, evidence of corruption that probably stretched further than either of them realized. A smart man would walk away. A smart man would be on his horse right now, riding toward the next anonymous town. But Colt Mercer had stopped being a smart man the day he decided surviving wasn't the same as living. 3 days, he said. That's what Hale's man gave you, right? May nodded. Then we got 3 days to figure out how to drag this into the sunlight. He pointed at the papers. I need to see all of it. Every document your husband collected. Every name, every property, every fake signature. If we're going to do this, we do it right. Something changed in May's expression. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. The kind of desperate relief that came from realizing you weren't alone anymore. There's more, she said. Hidden in 3 different places. I can have it all here by tomorrow. Good. I'll talk to people, quietly. Find out who else Hale's hurt, who might be willing to testify if they thought they had a chance. Most people are too scared. Fear's a powerful thing, Colt agreed. But so's rage. You just gotta help folks remember which one matters more. May started gathering the papers, her hands steady now. You really think we can do this? No, Colt said honestly. But I've survived worse odds by not thinking too hard about them. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mrs. Carter? May. Just May. May. He tipped his hat. Your husband? The one who gathered all this evidence knowing it might get him killed? He was either the bravest man I never met or the dumbest. Hard to say which. May's smile was sad and fierce at the same time. He used to say the same thing about himself. Colt stepped out into the night, pulling the door closed behind him. The street was empty, the windows dark. Black Cinder looked like a town holding its breath, waiting for something to break. He could feel eyes watching from behind curtains. Good, he thought. Let them watch. Because whether May Carter knew it or not, the war had already started. It started the moment Hale's men dragged her into the street. It started the moment Colt stepped off that porch. It started the moment a widow decided her husband's death would mean something, even if it killed her to prove it. And now the only question was how many people would die before it ended. Colt walked back to the boarding house with his hand near his gun and his eyes on the shadows. Somewhere in the hills beyond town, Vernon Hale was hearing about what happened today. And tomorrow, or the day after, he'd make his response. Men like Hale always did. But for the first time in 2 years, he'd be responding to resistance instead of fear. And that changed everything. Colt didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window of his rented room with his gun disassembled on the small table, cleaning each piece by lamplight while his mind worked through problems that had no easy answers. Outside, Black Cinder was silent, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of wood settling in the cooling air. Peaceful, if you didn't know better. But Colt knew better. He'd seen towns like this before, places where violence had seeped into the ground like old blood, where people had learned to mistake silence for safety. The war had left the frontier littered with them. Settlements ruled by men who'd discovered that fear was easier to maintain than law, that a reputation for cruelty could accomplish what an army couldn't. Vernon Hale was one of those men. Colt could tell without ever meeting him. The forged deeds, the intimidation, the casual murders disguised as accidents, it all pointed to someone who understood that most people would rather surrender than fight, especially when fighting meant risking everything for uncertain rewards. The smart move would be to ride out at first light. May Carter's crusade wasn't his problem. Her dead husband's evidence wasn't his responsibility. Black Cinder's cowardice wasn't his shame to carry. But he kept thinking about that boy. The way he'd thrown himself at a grown man with nothing but his fists and his rage. 10 years old and already learning that the world would hurt the people he loved and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Colt reassembled his gun. The movement's automatic after years of practice. The Colt Navy revolver had been his father's, carried through the Mexican War and handed down the day Colt enlisted. His brother had been jealous, wanted the gun for himself, but their father had looked at Colt with those hard eyes and said, "You're the one who'll need it more." The old man had been right about that, at least. By the time dawn broke, Colt had made his decision. Not because it was smart or heroic, but because walking away would mean spending the rest of his life wondering if he could have made a difference and chose not to. He hated that feeling more than he hated the prospect of dying. The sun was barely up when someone knocked on his door, 3 sharp raps that had Colt on his feet with his gun in his hand before he was fully conscious of moving. "It's May Carter," a voice called through the wood. "We need to talk, now." Colt opened the door. May stood in the hallway looking like she hadn't slept either, her hair hastily pinned and her dress the same one from yesterday. Her face was pale, but her eyes were alert, fever-bright with the kind of manic energy that came from fear and determination burning in equal measure. "What happened?" "Someone tried to burn down the store last night." Colt grabbed his coat. "Your son?" "He's fine. We weren't there. I took him to stay with the school teacher after you left. But if we'd been sleeping upstairs..." Her voice caught. She swallowed hard and continued. "The fire didn't catch. Whoever did it was either incompetent or wanted to send a message." "Message received," Colt said grimly. He followed her down the stairs and out into the street, where a handful of early risers were already whispering to each other and casting nervous glances toward the trading post. The damage wasn't extensive, scorch marks around the back door where someone had piled kindling and struck a match, but the intent was clear. This was a warning. Next time they'd use more accelerant. Next time they'd make sure. Colt crouched by the burn marks, studying them in the gray morning light. "They didn't break in first. Didn't try to make it look like an accident. Just wanted you to know they could reach you whenever they wanted." "Hale," May said. "Probably, or someone trying to earn his favor." Colt stood, brushing ash from his hands. "Either way, your 3 days just got shorter." May's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better work fast." They spent the morning locked in the back room of the trading post, surrounded by her husband's hidden documents. May had kept her word. She'd retrieved everything from the various hiding places, and now the desk was buried under a paper trail of corruption that would have made a federal prosecutor weep with joy. If federal prosecutors cared about frontier justice, which Colt knew from experience they mostly didn't, he read through deed after deed, contract after contract, his anger building with each forgery. Hale's operation was more sophisticated than he'd expected. The man wasn't just stealing land, he was building a network. Ranches became supply stations. Trading posts became distribution centers. Stage stops became checkpoints. Every piece of property he seized gave him more control over the flow of goods, people, and information through this part of the territory. He's not just a land baron, Colt said, looking up from a particularly damning set of documents. He's building a private kingdom. Control the land, control the people, control the politics. Give him another 5 years, and he'll own half the territorial legislature. May nodded. My husband figured that out too. That's why he knew the local authorities wouldn't help. Hale probably has judges and sheriffs on his payroll across 3 counties. What about the federal marshals? The nearest marshal's office is in Denver. Even if we could get word to them, they'd send 1, maybe 2 men to investigate. Against Hale's private army, they'd be dead before they cleared the county line. Colt leaned back, the chair protesting. So we can't rely on the law. Can't fight him head on, and we can't run because he'll just keep doing this to other people. That's about the size of it, May said. You always pick the easy battles? She almost smiled. Wouldn't know. Never picked any battles before this one. They kept working. Colt started making notes, not of the legal details, which were over his head, but of the names that kept appearing. People who'd been forced to sell. Witnesses who'd seen intimidation. Clerks who'd notarized suspicious documents. Each name was a potential crack in Hale's armor, if they could be convinced to talk. Around noon, May's son appeared with a basket of food from the boarding house. The kid moved quietly, his eyes older than they'd been 2 days ago. Violence did that. Aged you in ways that had nothing to do with years. Ma, the boy said, setting down the basket. Miss Brennan says half the town's talking about the fire. Says people are scared. People have been scared for 2 years, Thomas, May replied, but her voice softened when she said his name. Being scared is nothing new. Miss Brennan says it's different now, says they're scared of what comes next. Colt looked up from his notes. The school teacher? She smart? Smartest person in Black Cinder, May said. Came here from Boston 5 years ago to teach. Stayed when most sensible people left. I'd like to talk to her. May hesitated. She's got no love for Hale, but she's also got a school full of children depending on her. She won't risk them. I'm not asking her to risk anything. I just want to know what people are saying, what they're thinking. Can't fight fear if you don't understand where it's coming from. Thomas spoke up, surprising them both. I can take you to her. School lets out in an hour. Colt glanced at May, who looked torn between maternal protectiveness and the practical need for help. Finally, she nodded. Straight there and back, she told her son. And if you see any of Hale's men, you run. You hear me? I hear you, Ma. An hour later, Colt found himself standing in a one-room schoolhouse that smelled like chalk dust and pine wood, watching a slim woman in her 30s dismiss a class of 12 children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. She had red hair pulled into a severe bun and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been trained in deportment at some expensive finishing school before deciding the frontier suited her better. The children filed out in orderly fashion, casting curious glances at the stranger in the back of the room. Thomas gave Colt a nod and followed them, leaving him alone with the schoolteacher. You're the one who faced down Ray Cutler and his boys, she said without preamble, turning to face him. Her voice carried the clipped vowels of old Boston money, but her hands were calloused from frontier work. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Colt admitted. Catherine Brennan. She didn't offer her hand. I assume you're here because May Carter thinks I can help with whatever fool plan you're cooking up. Just wanted to talk, get a sense of the town. The town is terrified. Catherine started erasing the chalkboard with sharp, angry strokes. For 2 years, we've watched Vernon Hale take everything that wasn't nailed down, and even some things that were. We've buried good people. We've watched families destroyed, and we've done nothing because doing something meant becoming the next target. That include you? She paused, her back still to him. I have 19 students, Mr. Mercer. 19 children who need an education more than they need me to be a hero. If I make trouble, Hale closes the school. Where does that leave them? Learning from their parents that cowardice is acceptable if you've got a good reason. Catherine spun around, her eyes flashing. How dare you? I'm not judging you, Colt interrupted. I'm telling you what those kids are learning. That fear is stronger than right. That power matters more than justice. That the people who should protect them would rather protect themselves. And what exactly do you think one school teacher can do against 12 armed men and a corrupt sheriff? I don't know yet, but I know what a whole town can do if they stop thinking like victims. Catherine laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound. You've been here 3 days. I've been here 5 years. You think I haven't tried to organize resistance? You think I haven't talked to people, begged them to stand together? She gestured at the empty classroom. Half these children have parents who've been threatened. The other half have parents who are dead or run off. The ones who are left are just trying to survive until they can save enough money to leave. What about you? Why haven't you left? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for a moment, her anger deflating into something more complicated. Because someone needs to remember, she said finally. Someone needs to teach these children that this isn't normal. That towns aren't supposed to be run by thugs. That fear isn't a permanent condition. She met his eyes. I may be a coward, Mr. Mercer, but I'm a coward who refuses to let the next generation think this is how the world has to be. Colt found himself respecting her despite the sharp edges. That's not cowardice. That's the long game. The long game doesn't help May Carter keep her store. No, Colt agreed. But it might help if people saw that resistance was possible, even if it's small, even if it's just one person saying no. Catherine studied him with the assessing gaze of someone used to reading character in fidgety children and dishonest adults. May thinks you're going to save this town, are you? I think I'm going to try not to get her killed. Past that, I'm making it up as I go. Honest, at least. She crossed her arms. What do you need from me? Information. You know this town better than anyone. Who's likely to help if they thought they had a chance? Who's too scared to ever fight back? Who's secretly on Hale's payroll? That's a dangerous amount of trust you're asking for. You got a better option? Catherine considered this, then moved to her desk and pulled out a ledger. I keep attendance records, but I also keep notes on the families. Who's struggling, who's doing well, who's had trouble with Hale. She opened the book, revealing pages of neat handwriting. If you're serious about this, you should know what you're up against. They spent the next hour going through her notes. Catherine had documented everything with the precision of a trained academic. Which families had lost property to Hale, which men had been beaten or killed, which women had been widowed. It was a catalog of systematic oppression, and reading it made Colt's blood run cold. The Johnsons lost their ranch last year, Catherine said, pointing to an entry. Hale claimed they owed back taxes. The family swears they paid in full, but the county clerk's records showed a balance. The clerk was found 3 weeks later drowned in the river. Accidental, according to Sheriff Ridley. Let me guess. The clerk's records showed the Johnsons still owed money, even after he was dead. Exactly. Catherine flipped a page. Then there's Samuel Ortega. He ran the livery stable before the current owner. Refused to give Hale's horses priority service. His stable burned down. He rebuilt. It burned down again. Third time, he sold to Hale's man for a quarter of what it was worth and left town. He's still alive? As far as I know, went to Santa Fe. Colt made a note of the name. Anyone else who got out before Hale could kill them? A few, but they're scattered across the territory. Most want nothing to do with Black Cinder anymore. Can't say I blame them. What about people still here? Anyone with enough spine to stand up if they had backup? Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's Marcus Webb. He runs the freight company. Lost his brother to one of Hale's accidents, but still operates because leaving would mean abandoning his mother. He's angry, but smart enough to hide it. Anyone else? Dutch Kellerman, the barber. You've met him. He's old, but he was a Pinkerton agent before he retired out here. Knows how to handle himself, and he hates Hale with a passion. His daughter was engaged to a rancher Hale ran off 3 years ago. Colt remembered Dutch's warning on the porch. The old man had told him not to get involved, but there'd been something in his voice, regret, maybe. The sound of a man who'd spent too long watching injustice and doing nothing. What about Sheriff Ridley? Catherine's expression soured. Boone Ridley was a good lawman once, fought in the war, came back decorated, but Hale broke him, threatened his family. Had his deputies killed one by one until Boone was alone and drinking himself to death. She closed the ledger. He's not reliable. Too much guilt, too much whiskey. Even if you could get him sober, I don't know if there's anything left of the man he used to be. Men can surprise you, Colt said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Catherine walked him to the door as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. Mr. Mercer, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this? And don't give me some line about it being the right thing to do. Men don't risk their lives for strangers because of abstract morality. Colt thought about lying, but Catherine Brennan struck him as someone who'd know. I had a brother, James. He was younger than me by 3 years, smarter by a mile. During the war, he saw some Confederate troops burning a farmhouse with a family still inside. He went charging in to save them. No backup, no plan. Got himself killed for his trouble. Did he save them? Yeah, 3 kids and their mother. They lived. Colt adjusted his hat. Afterward, my commanding officer told me James was a fool, that brave men who don't think get themselves killed for nothing, and maybe he was right. But those kids grew up because my brother decided their lives mattered more than his. You think May Carter's store matters that much? I think if I keep walking away from people who need help, eventually I'll forget why I survived when my brother didn't. Catherine's expression softened slightly. That's a heavy burden to carry. We all carry something, Colt said. He left the schoolhouse as the afternoon began its slow slide toward evening. Thomas was waiting outside, sitting on the steps and tossing pebbles at a fence post. Miss Brennan help? The boy asked. More than she probably wanted to. They walked back through town, and Colt found himself studying Black Cinder with new eyes. It looked like any other frontier settlement. Dirt streets, wooden buildings, horses tied to hitching posts. But knowing what Catherine had told him, he could see the fear underneath. The way people walked a little faster when passing certain buildings. The way conversation stopped when strangers approached. The way eyes tracked movement without appearing to look. A town holding its breath. When they reached the trading post, May was waiting with someone Colt didn't recognize. A heavy-set man with graying hair and the weather-beaten face of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. This is Marcus Webb, May said. He wanted to meet you. Webb extended a calloused hand. His grip was firm, testing. Heard you're planning something stupid. That's one way to put it, Colt said. Good. I'm tired of smart men doing nothing. Webb glanced at May, then back to Colt. My brother Daniel was one of the first people Hale killed. Made it look like Daniel fell off a loading dock and broke his neck. But I know the truth. Daniel found out Hale was running stolen goods through his freight routes and threatened to report him. I'm sorry, Colt said. Don't want your sorry. Want your plan. Webb's jaw tightened. I've got 3 wagons, 4 drivers, and enough anger to fuel a locomotive. Tell me how to hurt Vernon Hale, and I'll do it. May looked at Colt, a question in her eyes. He could see her trying to gauge whether Webb was sincere or desperate or crazy, whether bringing him in would help or just get more people killed. Colt made a decision. Inside, all of you. They gathered in the back room, May, Thomas, Marcus Webb, and Colt. He spread the documents across the desk and started explaining what he'd learned from Catherine Brennan and from reading through the evidence. Hale's operation depends on control, Colt said. Control of property, control of records, control of people. But control has weak points. The county clerk who falsifies documents, the sheriff who looks the other way, the hired guns who'll abandon ship if things get too hot. He tapped the papers. This evidence proves Hale's claims are fraudulent, but proof doesn't matter if nobody sees it. So we make them see it, Webb said. How? May asked. The territorial newspaper won't print anything against Hale. He owns the editor. The federal marshals are too far away. The local judge is in his pocket. Colt had been thinking about this all day, turning the problem over in his mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. Traditional channels were closed. Legal routes were blocked. Violence would just get them killed. So they needed something else. Something Hale wouldn't expect. We don't go through official channels, Colt said slowly. We go around them. Make this so public, so undeniable that Hale can't bury it. How? Webb repeated. We expose him in front of the whole town. Make him defend his claims in public, with witnesses, with evidence. Put him in a position where he either has to prove his deeds are legitimate or admit they're fake. May frowned. He'll just have his men kill anyone who speaks against him. Not if we do it right. Not if we make it happen all at once, before he has time to react. Colt looked at each of them in turn. But it's risky. People could die, including us. You need to know that before we start. Thomas spoke up, his young voice cutting through the tension. People are already dying. At least this way we'd be fighting back. May put a hand on her son's shoulder, pride and fear warring on her face. Thomas, he's right, Ma. Dad died trying to stop Hale. If we don't finish what he started, then it was all for nothing. The room went quiet. Outside, the sound of a freight wagon rumbling past, a dog barking. Normal sounds from a town that was anything but normal. Finally, Webb broke the silence. I'm in. Whatever you need. May took a shaky breath. Me too, obviously. Then we start tomorrow, Colt said. Quiet-like, talking to people. Finding anyone else willing to stand up. Building a case that's too big for Hale to squash. And if we can't find enough people? May asked. Colt met her eyes. Then we try anyway, because sometimes losing is better than not trying. They talked for another hour, making plans that felt both necessary and hopeless. Webb would reach out to other business owners who'd been hurt by Hale. May would contact families who'd lost property. Catherine Brennan, if she could be convinced, would help organize the presentation of evidence. And Colt would handle the most dangerous part. He'd pay a visit to Sheriff Boone Ridley. By the time they dispersed, twilight had settled over Black Cinder like a shroud. Webb left through the back door, not wanting to be seen. Thomas went upstairs with strict instructions to stay away from the windows. May started sorting documents, her hands moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone using work to avoid thinking too hard about consequences. Colt prepared to leave, but May called after him. Mr. Mercer? He turned. My husband used to say that courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. She looked down at the papers in her hands. I'm terrified, but thank you for helping me do this anyway. We haven't done anything yet. No, but we're going to try. That's more than this town's done in 2 years. Colt walked back to the boarding house as night fell, and lamps began flickering on in windows. Somewhere out there, Vernon Hale was hearing about the fire that hadn't quite caught, about the stranger who was still in town, about May Carter who hadn't run screaming into the night. And tomorrow, Hale would make his next move. But tonight, for the first time since arriving in Black Cinder, Colt felt like he was fighting for something instead of just running from everything. It didn't make the odds any better, didn't make survival any more likely, but it made getting up in the morning feel like it might actually matter. He cleaned his gun again before sleeping, checking the cylinder and the action, making sure everything worked smoothly. Old habits from the war. Preparation wasn't the same as certainty, but it was better than hope. And hope was in short supply these days. The sheriff's office sat at the end of Main Street like a tombstone marking the death of law in Black Cinder. Paint peeled from the wooden walls, and one of the front windows had been boarded over for so long that nobody remembered what had broken it. A single lamp burned inside, casting weak yellow light onto the street. Colt stood across the road for a full minute, watching the silhouette of a man hunched over a desk inside. Part of him wanted to turn around, find another way, avoid pinning any hope on a broken-down drunk who'd already proven he couldn't be counted on. But Catherine Brennan's words kept echoing in his head. Boone Ridley was a good lawman once. Once didn't mean much. Once didn't stop bullets or forge deeds or protect widows from having their lives stolen. But once was more than nothing, and right now Colt needed every scrap of something he could find. He crossed the street and pushed open the door. The smell hit him first. Whiskey, sweat, and the sour stench of a man who'd stopped caring about basic dignity. Sheriff Boone Ridley sat behind a desk, buried under stacks of unfiled reports and empty bottles. He was maybe 50, with gray threading through dark hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome before drinking carved it into something harder. His badge was pinned crooked on a vest that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. He didn't look up when Colt entered. Office is closed, Ridley muttered, his voice thick and slurred. Come back tomorrow. It's 4 in the afternoon, Colt said. Then come back yesterday. Colt closed the door behind him and moved deeper into the room. A gun belt hung on a peg near the desk, the holster empty. 2 cells sat in the back, both doors hanging open, both empty. The whole place felt abandoned, even with Ridley sitting right there. You Sheriff Ridley? That's what the badge says. Ridley finally glanced up, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. You're the one who made Ray Cutler back down. Mercer, right? Word travels. Word always travels, especially when it's about someone signing his own death warrant. Ridley reached for a bottle on the desk, found it empty, and tossed it toward a corner where it joined half a dozen others. You here to file a complaint? Report a crime? Because I got a whole drawer full of those and they don't mean a damn thing. I'm here to talk. Then you're wasting your time. I don't talk. I drink and I collect a salary and I stay out of Vernon Hale's way. That's the job now. Colt pulled out a chair and sat without being invited. That the job you signed up for when you took the oath? Ridley's laugh was ugly. The oath? You know what that piece of paper's worth out here? Same as every other piece of paper. Exactly what the man with the most guns says it's worth. And Hale's got more guns than me. He's got hired thugs. That's different. Dead is dead. Don't matter who pulls the trigger. Ridley leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. Let me guess. May Carter sent you. Figures she'd find another fool to throw at Hale's wall. She didn't send me. I came on my own. Why? This ain't your town, ain't your fight. Maybe I'm tired of watching people get hurt and doing nothing about it. Ridley's expression darkened. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy watching decent folks lose everything while I sit here soaking my conscience in rot-gut whiskey? He leaned forward, and for the first time Colt saw something beneath the drunk, a flash of the man Catherine had described. I had 3 deputies. Good men. Family men. Hale killed them one by one, made each one look like something else. Accident, robbery, suicide. The last one, Jimmy Parsons, he was 23 years old. Found him hanging in his own barn with a note saying he couldn't take the guilt. Guilt over what? That's the thing. There wasn't nothing to feel guilty about. Jimmy was straight as they come, but Hale needed me isolated, needed me scared, so he manufactured a reason and strung that boy up like a side of beef. Ridley's hands were shaking now. I cut him down myself. Had to tell his mama that her son killed himself over crimes he didn't commit. You want to tell me what the oath is worth after that? The room was quiet except for the sound of Ridley's ragged breathing. Colt let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. Hale's been stealing land using forged documents. May Carter's husband figured it out and gathered evidence before Hale killed him. I've seen the proof, 17 properties, maybe more, all taken through fraud. I know, Ridley said quietly. Colt hadn't expected that. You know? Of course I know. I'm a drunk, not an idiot. I've seen the fake deeds, the forged signatures, the paid-off clerks. I know exactly what Hale's doing. He gestured vaguely at the filing cabinets lining the wall. I got reports in there from families begging for help. Evidence of intimidation, assault, arson. I got witness statements that had put Hale away for 20 years if anyone with authority gave a damn. Then why haven't you done anything? Because the territorial judge is Hale's cousin. Because the county prosecutor takes his orders from Hale's lawyer. Because every time I tried to push back, someone else died. Ridley's voice cracked. You want to know the real reason? I'm a coward, pure and simple. I chose survival over justice, and I got to live with that every single day. Colt had dealt with enough broken men to know when someone was too far gone, and when they were just drowning and needed someone to throw them a rope. Ridley was drowning, but he wasn't gone. Not yet. I'm planning to expose Hale publicly, Colt said. Force him to defend his land claims in front of the whole town. Make it so visible that even his bought politicians can't ignore it. Ridley barked out a laugh. That's your plan? Public shaming? Hale don't care about shame. He cares about power. Then we take his power. Show people that his empire is built on lies. Get enough witnesses to speak up that he can't silence them all. He'll kill you, and May Carter, and anyone else who stands against him. Maybe, Colt admitted. But right now he's killing people anyway, and nobody's fighting back. At least this way we go down swinging. Ridley stared at him like he was looking at a ghost. You remind me of someone, my younger self probably, before I learned that swinging just gets you hit harder. Or it makes the other guy think twice before swinging at someone else. That's naive. Maybe. But I'd rather be naive and trying than smart and hiding. Ridley stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He moved to the window and looked out at the darkening street. His shoulders slumped under the weight of years spent watching his town die. Even if I wanted to help, which I ain't saying I do, What could I possibly offer? I got no deputies, no authority. The badge on my chest is just decoration at this point. You got the office, Colt said. You got access to official records. And you got a name that still means something to the older folks in this town, even if you don't believe it anymore. My name means coward. Then change what it means. Help us build a case so airtight that Hale can't wriggle out of it. Ridley turned back and his eyes were wet. You know what happens to people who help you? They end up like my deputies, like May Carter's husband, like everyone else who thought they could stand up to Vernon Hale. Then we make sure their deaths meant something by finishing what they started. For a long moment, Ridley just stood there, swaying slightly, a man balanced on the edge between the person he'd been and the person he'd become. Colt could see the war happening behind those bloodshot eyes, duty versus survival, courage versus fear, the ghost of who he used to be fighting the drunk he'd turned into. Finally, Ridley walked to the filing cabinet and pulled open a drawer. He withdrew a thick folder and dropped it on the desk between them. Everything I couldn't do anything about, he said. Complaints, witness statements, evidence I collected before I gave up. It's all there. Colt opened the folder. Page after page of documentation, families reporting intimidation, merchants describing extortion, ranchers detailing threats. It was a paper trail of systematic terror, carefully recorded and then carefully ignored. Why'd you keep this if you weren't going to use it? Colt asked. Because some part of me hoped that someday I'd find the courage to be the lawman I used to be. Ridley's voice was barely a whisper. Or that someone else would come along who still believed justice was possible. I don't believe in justice, Colt said honestly. I believe in trying to stop bad men from hurting good people. Sometimes that works, sometimes it don't. But sitting still and letting it happen guarantees it keeps happening. Ridley sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. What do you need from me? For now? Just this folder. And your promise that when the time comes, you'll remember how to wear that badge like it means something. And if I can't, then at least you'll know you tried. Colt stood, tucking the folder under his arm. He was halfway to the door when Ridley spoke again. Mercer? He turned. My deputies, Jimmy and the others, they believed in the law, believed in doing right even when it was hard. I let them down by not protecting them, by not being strong enough to stand with them. Ridley's voice steadied slightly. You get people killed with this plan of yours, that's on you. But you get them killed fighting for something that matters? That's different. That's dying like a person instead of living like a corpse. I'll try to keep everyone alive, Colt said. Don't make promises you can't keep. Just make sure their deaths count for something if it comes to that. Colt left the sheriff's office as night settled over Black Cinder in earnest. The folder under his arm felt heavier than it should have, weighted with all the suffering that had been carefully documented and officially ignored. He thought about Jimmy Parsons hanging in his barn, about May Carter's husband lying at the bottom of a ravine, about all the people who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with their lives. Maybe Ridley was right. Maybe this whole plan was just going to get more good people killed. But doing nothing guaranteed Hale would keep killing anyway. The boarding house was quiet when he returned. Mrs. Calloway gave him a long look, but didn't ask questions, which Colt appreciated. He climbed the stairs to his room and spread Ridley's files across the bed alongside May's documents, trying to see the full picture of Hale's operation. It was worse than he'd thought. The man wasn't just stealing land. He was systematically dismantling the social fabric of Black Cinder. Every business he took control of, every family he drove away, every public official he corrupted or intimidated, it all added up to something bigger than simple greed. Hale was building a feudal kingdom in the middle of the American frontier, turning citizens into subjects and law into whatever served his interests. And he was getting away with it because he understood something fundamental about human nature. Most people would rather survive than fight, even if survival meant living on their knees. Colt worked through the night, cross-referencing documents, matching names from Ridley's files with properties listed in May's evidence. A pattern emerged. Hale targeted specific types of people: widows, small landowners, anyone without powerful connections or the resources to fight back. He avoided large ranches owned by families with political influence. He stayed away from businesses that might have allies in territorial government. He was methodical, careful, and patient, which meant he could be beaten the same way. Methodically, carefully, patiently. By the time dawn broke, Colt had the skeleton of a plan. It wasn't good. It had 100 ways to fail and maybe 2 ways to succeed, but it was something. He grabbed a few hours of sleep, then headed to the Carter trading post. May was already awake, looking like she'd slept about as much as he had. Thomas was sweeping the floor while trying to pretend he wasn't listening to every word the adult said. "I talked to Sheriff Ridley," Colt announced without preamble. May's eyebrows rose. And he's not as far gone as people think. He gave me files, years of evidence he's been collecting but couldn't act on. Why couldn't he act on it? Because he was scared, because his deputies were dead, because the whole system's rigged against him. Colt set the combined documents on the counter, but scared don't mean useless. When the time comes, I think he'll stand with us. You think or you know? Nobody knows anything until the moment comes, but I believe he wants to be the man he used to be. Whether he can manage it is another question. May studied the pile of papers. This is really happening, isn't it? We're really going to challenge Vernon Hale. Unless you changed your mind. I haven't changed my mind. I'm just realizing that changing my mind wouldn't matter anymore. We've already crossed the line. Hale knows we're gathering evidence. That fire wasn't random. She was right. The moment Colt had stepped into the street 3 days ago, the moment May had started pulling out her husband's hidden documents, they'd committed to a path that didn't have an easy exit. "Then we finish what we started," Colt said. "Today I want to talk to Dutch Kellerman and Marcus Webb. See if we can get a few more people willing to speak up when the time comes. The more voices we have, the harder it is for Hale to silence everyone." Thomas stopped sweeping. "What about me?" May shook her head. "Absolutely not. You're staying here where it's safe." "Nowhere's safe, Ma. You said so yourself." The boy's voice cracked with frustration. "I'm old enough to help. I can talk to people, carry messages." "You're 10 years old. Dad was gathering evidence when I was 8. I helped him hide documents. I can help now." "Your father is dead because he gathered evidence." May's voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. "I won't lose you too, Thomas." "I can't." The boy's face crumpled, but he nodded. Colt looked away, giving them privacy in their shared grief. "Mrs. Carter's right," he said quietly. "This gets dangerous. I need to know you're somewhere safe. Your ma can't focus on fighting Hale if she's worried about you getting hurt." Thomas wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Then who's going to worry about her?" "I will," Colt said, meeting the boy's gaze. "I promise." It was the kind of promise he'd told Ridley not to make, one he might not be able to keep, but Thomas needed to hear it, and May needed her son to believe his mother had protection. Even if that protection was just a drifter with a gun and a tendency to pick fights he couldn't win. May reached out and squeezed Colt's arm briefly. "Thank you." He left them there and headed to the barber shop. Dutch Kellerman was sweeping hair clippings from his previous customer, a rancher Colt recognized from the saloon. The old barber looked up when Colt entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Need a shave?" Dutch asked. "Need a conversation." Dutch glanced at the rancher, who was settling his hat and preparing to leave. Once they were alone, the old man set down his broom and locked the door. "You got a death wish, son," Dutch said without preamble. "Whole town's talking about how you're gathering evidence against Hale. How long you think before one of his boys puts a bullet in your back?" "I'm being careful." "Careful, don't stop hired guns. I seen better men than you get killed for less than what you're planning." Dutch moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "You know why I never fought back? Why I sit here cutting hair and pretending I don't see what's happening?" "Because you're scared," Colt said. Not accusatory, just stating fact. "Damn right I'm scared. I'm 73 years old. I spent 30 years chasing outlaws for the Pinkertons, putting my life on the line for justice and law. You know what that got me? Shot 3 times, stabbed twice, and more scars than I can count. I came to Black Cinder to retire, not to die fighting another man's war." "Then why'd you warn me about Hale's men on that first day? Why'd you look so torn up when I stepped into the street?" Dutch turned from his window, and his eyes were hard. "Because I know what you're feeling, that pull to do something, fix something, save someone. I spent my whole career answering that call. And you want to know the truth? Half the people I saved didn't deserve saving. Half the outlaws I caught were just desperate men trying to feed their families. The world's messier than the law pretends it is. Hale ain't a desperate man trying to feed his family. No, He's a predator. I know the type. Dutch sank into his barber chair with a sigh. My daughter was engaged to a good man named Peter Halstead, owned a small ranch north of here. Hale wanted that land because it had water rights. When Peter refused to sell, Hale's men started a range war, burned Peter's cattle, poisoned his wells, killed his ranch hands one by one. What happened? Peter fought back at first, got himself and 3 of his men killed in the process. My daughter watched them burn his house down with Peter still inside. Dutch's voice went flat. She left town the next day. Haven't seen her in 2 years. Last letter I got, she's married to a shopkeeper in Denver and trying to forget Black Cinder exists. I'm sorry. Don't want your sorry. Want to know why I'm still here when everyone I loved left or died? Truth is, I don't know anymore. Maybe I'm waiting for someone to finally stop Vernon Hale. Maybe I'm just too old to start over somewhere else. Colt leaned against the barber counter. Catherine Brennan said you were a Pinkerton. That means you know how to investigate, how to build cases, how to connect evidence. I know how to do a lot of things I'm too old to do anymore. I'm not asking you to fight. I'm asking you to help me make sense of what we've got. Ridley's files, May's documents, it's all pieces, but I need someone who knows how to put them together into something that'll hold up. Dutch was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the back room. He returned with a leather case, worn and cracked with age. Inside were investigators' tools, magnifying glass, measurement instruments, notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. I spent 30 years learning how to prove crimes in court, Dutch said. How to document evidence, trace paper trails, build cases that lawyers couldn't tear apart. You want that knowledge, I'll give it, but I won't pick up a gun, won't stand in the street and face down Hale's men. That part of my life is over. Don't need you to. Just need you to make sure our evidence is solid enough that Hale can't talk his way out of it. Dutch opened one of his old notebooks, revealing pages of meticulous notes from cases long closed. Then bring me everything you got. I'll go through it like I used to. Verify authenticity, check for forgeries, establish chain of custody. If we're going to accuse a man of fraud, we better make damn sure the accusation sticks. They spent the next several hours going through documents in the back room of the barber shop. Dutch worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checking signatures against known samples, measuring paper quality, identifying inconsistencies in ink and handwriting. This deed here, Dutch said, pointing to one of Hale's forged land transfers. See how the signature loop's different on the last name? That's 2 different hands trying to match the same signature. Amateur forgery. Any decent judge would spot it. Except the judge is Hale's cousin, which is why we need overwhelming evidence. Not just a few questionable documents, but a pattern so clear that even a corrupt judge can't ignore it without exposing himself. Dutch made notes in the margin. We need witnesses, too. People who saw the intimidation, the threats, the violence. Paper trails prove fraud, but human testimony proves malice. Working on that, May's talking to families. Marcus Webb's reaching out to other business owners. What about the people who left town? The ones who ran instead of fighting? Colt hadn't considered that. You think they'd come back to testify? Some might, if they thought Hale was finally going to face justice, if they thought it was safe. Dutch pulled out a list of names. I know at least 6 families who fled in the last 3 years. Most went to Santa Fe or Denver. If we could get them to return, their testimony about why they left could be powerful. That's a lot of people to track down, and we're running out of time. Then we prioritize. Find the ones closest, the ones with the strongest cases, the ones who might actually come back if asked. Dutch circled 3 names. Start with these. Samuel Ortega in Santa Fe. He owned the livery before Hale burned him out. Margaret Whitmore in Denver, widow whose husband's forged deed we found in May's files. And Robert Chen, he ran a mining operation that Hale wanted. Hale's men caused a cave-in that killed 2 of Chen's workers. He sold for nothing and left. Colt copied down the names and last known locations. It would mean sending telegrams, maybe even riding out to meet some of them personally. Time they didn't have. But Dutch was right. Living witnesses would make the case harder to dismiss than paper alone. By the time they finished, afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, and Colt's head ached from reading tiny handwritten notes. Dutch had reorganized all the evidence into a coherent structure: financial fraud, property theft, intimidation, assault, murder. Each section supported by multiple documents and witness statements. "This is good work," Colt said. "It's old work, just applying skills I should have been using all along instead of hiding in my barber shop." Dutch looked tired, but also more alive than he'd seemed before. Like having a purpose again had reminded him who he used to be. "What's next?" "I talked to Marcus Webb, see how many other business owners he's brought in. Then we start figuring out how to make this public without getting everyone killed in the process. That's the hard part. Hale controls information in this town. Controls who hears what, who sees what. You try to expose him through normal channels, he'll shut you down before you start. Then we find channels he don't control." Dutch smiled grimly. "You got something specific in mind, or you just hoping inspiration strikes?" "Little of both," Colt admitted. "But I'm thinking if we can get enough people together in one place, all speaking up at once, it becomes harder for Hale to silence everyone. Strength in numbers. Or just more targets. That too." Colt left the barber shop as evening approached, the reorganized evidence secured in a leather satchel Dutch had provided. The street was busier now, people finishing their workday, heading home or to the saloon. Normal life in a town that had learned to pretend everything was fine. But Colt could see the cracks if he looked. The way people's eyes darted nervously at loud sounds. The way conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. The way everyone seemed to be waiting for something terrible to happen, because terrible things always happened eventually. He found Marcus Webb at the freight office, a dusty building near the edge of town where wagons loaded and unloaded goods bound for other settlements. Webb was arguing with one of his drivers about a shipment, but he broke off when he saw Colt approaching. "We need to talk," Colt said. Webb dismissed the driver and led Colt into his private office. It was Spartan. A desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, and a map of the territory on one wall showing freight routes. "I talked to 8 business owners," Webb said without waiting for Colt to ask. 3 are willing to speak up if we can guarantee some protection. 2 are too scared but said they'd support us privately. 3 told me to go to hell and stop making trouble. 3 out of 8 willing to testify is better than none. It ain't enough. We need more people if we're going to make Hale take this seriously. We got witnesses from Ridley's files. Dutch is helping track down people who left town, and Catherine Brennan might be able to reach families through her school connections." Colt set the satchel on Webb's desk. "But you're right. We need numbers. 1 or 2 people speaking up just makes them targets. 20 or 30 people standing together is harder to intimidate." Webb leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "You really think we can pull this off? Make Vernon Hale face justice after 2 years of him running this town like his personal kingdom?" "I think we can try. Whether trying is enough, I don't know yet." "My brother died trying," Webb said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if trying just means dying slower." "Your brother gathered information about Hale's stolen goods operation, right? That got him killed." "Yeah." "Then he helped build the case we're using now. His death wasn't for nothing. It was part of a longer fight. We're just the ones finishing what he started." Webb looked at the map on his wall, at the routes his freight wagons traveled across the territory. "You know what the worst part is? I knew Hale was using my wagons to transport stolen goods. I knew, and I didn't stop it because stopping it would have meant losing my business. My brother died trying to expose the truth, and I kept working for the man who killed him because I was too much of a coward to do otherwise." "You're here now," Colt pointed out. "That's what matters." "Is it? Or am I just trying to make myself feel less guilty?" "Can it be both?" Webb smiled bitterly. "I suppose it can." He pushed off from the desk. "All right, I'll keep talking to people, see if I can find anyone else willing to stand with us. But Colt, you need to understand something. These folks are scared, not just worried or nervous, terrified. Hale's broken this town so thoroughly that most people can't even imagine fighting back anymore. You're asking them to rediscover courage they buried years ago. Then we dig it up," Colt said. "Because buried don't mean dead." He left the freight office as darkness settled over Black Cinder completely. Somewhere in the hills beyond town, Vernon Hale sat in whatever mansion he'd built from stolen wealth, probably hearing reports about the resistance forming against him, probably deciding how to crush it before it grew too large. Colt walked back to the boarding house, his hand never far from his gun, his eyes scanning every shadow. The town felt different now, charged with something that hadn't been there before. Not quite hope, not quite fear. Something in between. The electricity of change, of old patterns breaking, of people waking up from a long nightmare and wondering if maybe, just maybe, they could fight back. Mrs. Calloway intercepted him in the hallway before he could reach his room. "Man came looking for you," she said quietly. "One of Hale's riders. Said to tell you that Mr. Hale wants to meet." Colt went still. "When?" "Tomorrow, noon, at Hale's ranch." She handed him a folded note. "He said if you don't come, he'll assume you're too scared to talk like civilized men." Colt unfolded the paper. The handwriting was educated, flowing, not what he'd expected from a frontier land baron. "Mr. Mercer, I believe we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I'd like to discuss the situation in Black Cinder like reasonable men. Come to my ranch tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I promise safe passage. If you're as interested in justice as people claim, surely you can spare an hour to hear my side." VH. It was a trap. Obviously. Hale would either try to buy him off, intimidate him, or just kill him outright and dump his body somewhere it wouldn't be found until spring. But it was also an opportunity. A chance to see Hale's operation up close, gauge his defenses, maybe even learn something useful. "You gonna go?" Mrs. Calloway asked. "Probably." "That's foolish." "Yeah," Colt agreed. "But I've done foolish before. Usually works out about half the time." He spent the rest of the evening preparing. Cleaned his gun again, checked his knife, wrote a letter detailing everything he'd learned and left it with instructions for Mrs. Calloway to deliver to May Carter if he didn't return by nightfall tomorrow. Then he tried to sleep, knowing he probably wouldn't. Tomorrow he'd walk into Vernon Hale's territory with nothing but a gun and a probably empty promise of safe passage. He'd look the man in the eye who'd killed May's husband, Ridley's deputies, Webb's brother, and dozens of others. And he'd try not to become the next name on that list. Morning came too soon and brought May Carter with it. She was waiting outside the boarding house when Colt emerged, her face pale in the early light. She'd obviously heard about the invitation somehow, probably from Mrs. Calloway, who couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it. "You're not actually going," May said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "That's suicide. Hale will kill you the moment you're on his property." Colt adjusted his gun belt and started walking toward the livery stable. May followed, her footsteps quick and angry on the wooden sidewalk. "He promised safe passage," Colt said. "His promises are worth less than the paper he forges deeds on. You know that." "Maybe. But he also invited me to talk, which means he's worried. Men who aren't worried don't bother with conversation. They just shoot." May grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop and face her. "My husband thought he could outsmart Hale too. Thought gathering evidence and being careful would keep him safe. They found him at the bottom of a ravine with his neck broken." "I'm not your husband." "No, you're a stranger who showed up 5 days ago and decided to fight someone else's war, which makes you either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and right now I can't tell which." Colt gently removed her hand from his arm. "I need to see Hale's operation. Need to understand how he thinks, what his weaknesses are. Can't do that from town. You'll be outnumbered, surrounded by his men. If he decides to kill you, there's nothing you can do about it. Then I'll die. But I'll die knowing something we didn't know before, and maybe that information helps you and Dutch and Webb finish what we started." May's eyes were bright with frustrated tears. "I didn't ask you to die for me. You asked me to help you fight back. Sometimes those are the same thing." She looked at him for a long moment, and Colt could see her trying to decide if he was worth the grief she'd feel when they brought back his body. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small derringer. "Take this," she said. "I got a gun. They'll make you leave your holster before you meet with Hale. Standard protocol, but they might not search thoroughly for a hideout piece." She pressed the tiny pistol into his hand. 2 shots. Won't stop multiple attackers, but it's better than nothing if things go bad." Colt tucked the derringer into his boot. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just come back alive so I don't have to add another name to the list of people who died because Vernon Hale is a monster." The ride to Hale's ranch took an hour through rolling hills that gradually gave way to better maintained fencing and greener pastures. Colt counted at least 3 line shacks on the way, each probably manned by armed guards watching for trespassers. The closer he got to the main house, the more obvious it became that Hale had built himself a small fortress. The ranch house itself sat on a rise overlooking a valley, a sprawling structure that looked more like a southern plantation mansion than a frontier dwelling. White columns, a wraparound porch, actual glass in every window. The kind of place that screamed wealth and power and didn't care who knew it. 4 men waited at the entrance to the property, all armed, all watching Colt with the flat-eyed stare of hired killers. Ray Cutler, the scarred enforcer from the trading post confrontation, stood at their center. "Mercer," Ray said, his hand resting on his gun. "Mr. Hale's expecting you, but first we got to make sure you're not bringing trouble. Just coming to talk, like the invitation said. Then you won't mind handing over that fancy revolver." Colt hesitated, then slowly unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. Ray took it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Anything else we should know about? Knife? Hideout gun?" "Just my winning personality." One of the other men, a lanky kid who looked barely 20, stepped forward and patted Colt down with the kind of thoroughness that suggested he'd done this before. His hands found the knife in Colt's belt and took it, found the money in his pocket and left it. But he didn't check the boots, didn't think to look for a weapon small enough to hide in footwear. May's gift stayed hidden. "He's clean," the kid reported. Ray gestured toward the house. "This way. And Mercer, don't do anything stupid. Mr. Hale wants to talk, but I got no problem shooting you if you give me a reason." They walked up the long drive to the main house, past corrals filled with horses worth more than most men earned in a year, past a bunkhouse that could have slept 30 men, past a barn that looked bigger than half the buildings in Black Cinder. Hale hadn't just stolen land. He'd built an empire on the backs of the people he'd destroyed. The inside of the house was even more ostentatious. Imported furniture, paintings in gilt frames, a chandelier that probably cost more than the Carter trading post was worth. It was the kind of wealth that wanted to be seen, wanted to intimidate, wanted to remind visitors that they were dealing with someone important. Vernon Hale waited in a study lined with bookshelves, sitting behind a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a dining table. He was younger than Colt expected, maybe 45, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of handsome face that probably charmed people right before he ruined their lives. He wore an expensive suit, completely out of place on the frontier, and when he stood to greet Colt, his movements were smooth and confident. "Mr. Mercer," Hale said, extending a hand, "thank you for accepting my invitation." Colt didn't shake. "Let's skip the pleasantries. You wanted to talk, so talk." Hale's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes, annoyance maybe, or calculation. He gestured to a leather chair across from the desk. "Please sit. Can I offer you a drink? I have an excellent bourbon from Kentucky." "I'm fine standing." "Suit yourself." Hale poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid and settled back into his chair. "I'll be direct, since you seem to prefer it. You're causing problems in Black Cinder, stirring up trouble, spreading lies about me, encouraging people to resist legitimate business transactions." "Legitimate," Colt repeated. "That what you call forging deeds and murdering anyone who gets in your way?" "I haven't murdered anyone, Mr. Mercer. And the accusations of forgery are nothing more than sour grapes from people who made bad financial decisions and now want someone to blame." May Carter's husband didn't make bad financial decisions. He was murdered because he figured out you've been stealing land through fraud. Hale sipped his bourbon, completely unfazed. "James Carter died in a tragic riding accident. I sent flowers to the funeral. As for the trading post, Mrs. Carter inherited debts her husband failed to disclose. I have documents proving she owes my holding company $3,000. If she can't pay, the property reverts to me. That's basic contract law. Your documents are forgeries. Then she should contest them in court. That's what civilized people do when they disagree about legal matters. Hard to contest anything when the judge is your cousin and the county prosecutor is on your payroll." Hale's expression finally changed, a flash of genuine annoyance. "You've been busy, talking to people, gathering information, playing detective. It's almost admirable. But here's what you're missing, Mr. Mercer. Everything I've done is legal. Completely, utterly legal. I file the proper paperwork. I follow the correct procedures. I use the courts and the law exactly as they're meant to be used. Using corrupt systems is still corruption." "Is it?" Hale leaned forward. "I didn't write the laws. I didn't appoint the judges. I didn't create a system where land ownership depends on who has the best lawyers and the most connections. I simply learned how to use that system better than anyone else. That's not a crime. That's intelligence. You've killed people. I haven't killed anyone personally. Can't be held responsible for what other men choose to do. If some of my business associates got a little overzealous protecting their interests, well, that's unfortunate. But it doesn't make me a murderer. Colt felt his jaw tighten. Hale was good at this. The reasonable tone, the legal double talk, the way he positioned himself as just another businessman working within the rules. It was probably the same performance he'd given to territorial officials, to judges, to anyone who questioned his methods. "Why'd you invite me here?" Colt asked. "To gloat? To threaten me? To try and justify yourself?" "None of those things." Hale set down his glass. "I invited you here to make you an offer. I'm not interested in, hear me out, you're clearly a capable man. Former soldier, good with a gun, smart enough to organize resistance. Those are valuable skills. I could use someone like you." Colt stared at him. "You're trying to hire me?" "Why not? I pay well, very well. My top men make more in a month than most cowboys see in a year. You'd have authority, respect, resources. All you'd have to do is stop fighting against me and start working for me. You want me to help you steal land and terrorize innocent people. I want you to help me build something. Black Cinder is just the beginning, Mr. Mercer. I'm assembling territory across 3 counties. In 10 years, this whole region will be under unified management, my management. That means stability, order, prosperity for everyone smart enough to be part of it. And everyone who's not smart enough gets crushed." Hale shrugged. "Progress requires sacrifice. Some people adapt, others get left behind. That's how civilization works. I'm offering you a chance to be on the winning side." "I've been on the winning side before," Colt said quietly. "Didn't much care for it." "That's your pride talking. But pride doesn't feed you. Pride doesn't keep you safe. Pride just gets you killed by people smarter than you." Hale pulled open a desk drawer and withdrew a stack of bills. $5,000. "Right now. Just for agreeing to stop interfering with my business. You can take the money and ride away, start fresh somewhere else. Or you can stay and work for me. Either way, you win." Colt looked at the money. $5,000 was more than he'd seen in 5 years of drifting. It was enough to buy land, start over, build something real instead of just surviving day to day. It was also blood money, paid for with the lives of people like James Carter and Jimmy Parsons and Webb's brother Daniel. "What about May Carter?" Colt asked. "What about her?" "She keeps her store?" Hale smiled. "If you work for me, I can be very generous. Mrs. Carter can keep her store. The debt disappears. Everyone's happy." "And the 17 other families you've stolen from?" "That's not part of this negotiation." "Then we don't have a negotiation." Colt turned toward the door. "Mr. Mercer," Hale's voice went cold, "I'm giving you a way out. A smart man would take it." "I've never been accused of being smart." "Then let me be clear about your alternatives. You continue down this path, you die. Not might die. Not probably die. Will die. I have 12 men on this property right now. I have contacts in every town within 100 miles. I have judges, prosecutors, sheriffs in my pocket. You're one man with a gun and some stolen documents. You can't win." Colt stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "Maybe not. But I can make sure everyone knows what you did. Can make sure your empire is built on a foundation everyone knows is rotten. That might not stop you, but it'll make every step forward harder, every new acquisition suspect, every claim questioned. You'll be dead before you accomplish any of that." "Probably. But the people helping me won't be. You kill me. You make me a martyr. You make the resistance stronger, not weaker." "There is no resistance," Hale said, and now his voice carried real anger. "There's a widow with delusions, a drunk sheriff, an old barber, and a few frightened shopkeepers. That's not resistance. That's a collection of cowards pretending to be brave because you showed up and gave them false hope. The moment you're gone, they'll crawl back into their holes and Black Cinder will be mine again." Colt finally turned to face him. "You really believe that? You think people are just waiting to surrender?" "I know they are, because I've seen it happen over and over. Push them hard enough, take enough from them, kill enough of their friends, and eventually they break. Everyone breaks, Mr. Mercer. Even you. It's just a question of when. Then I guess you'll find out." Ray Cutler was waiting outside the study with Colt's gun belt and knife. He handed them over with obvious reluctance. "You should have taken the money," Ray said quietly. "Easier to live rich than die proud." Easier ain't always better. The ride back to Black Cinder felt longer than the ride out. Colt's mind kept replaying the conversation, analyzing Hale's words, his body language, his confidence. The man wasn't bluffing about his resources or his willingness to kill. But he was worried enough to try bribery before violence, worried enough to explain himself, worried enough to show his hand. That meant the resistance was working, at least a little. Hale wouldn't waste time trying to buy off someone who wasn't a threat. But it also meant things were about to get more dangerous. Men like Hale didn't make offers and then graciously accept rejection. They escalated. They made examples. They reminded everyone why crossing them was a mistake. Colt reached Black Cinder as afternoon shadows started stretching across the street. May was waiting at the trading post, and the relief on her face when she saw him alive was almost painful to witness. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." "What happened? What did Hale want?" "To buy me off. Offered $5,000 to either leave town or work for him." May's eyes widened. That's more money than most people see in a lifetime. I know." "But you said no." "I said no." She studied his face, looking for something, regret maybe, or second thoughts. "Do you wish you'd said yes?" Colt thought about that honestly. $5,000 would have solved a lot of problems, would have given him the fresh start he'd been pretending to look for since the war ended. "No," he said finally. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because I'm tired of running from the man I used to be. Tired of pretending survival is the same as living." He met her eyes. "Your husband died fighting for something that mattered. Webb's brother died the same way. All those people Hale killed, they died because they refused to just roll over. Taking his money would have meant their deaths didn't mean anything." May's expression crumpled slightly, and for a moment Colt thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Then we keep fighting." "We keep fighting," Colt agreed. "But things are going to get worse before they get better. Hale knows we're organizing, knows we have evidence. He'll move against us soon, probably hard." "How soon?" "I'd guess we have a day. Maybe 2 if we're lucky. That's not enough time to build a proper case. Then we improvise." Colt glanced around the trading post, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "We need to gather everyone who's willing to stand with us. Tonight. Somewhere Hale's men won't see us meeting." "The church," May said. "It's been abandoned since the priest left town 2 years ago, but the building's still standing. We could use the basement." "All right. Get word to Marcus Webb, Catherine Brennan, anyone else you trust. Tell them to come after dark and be careful about it. We're going to lay everything out. The evidence, the risks, the plan. Everyone needs to understand what they're getting into before we take the next step." May started to move, then paused. "What is the next step?" "We expose Hale publicly, force him to defend his claims in front of the whole town, make it impossible for him to hide behind paperwork and corrupt officials." "How?" "Still working on that part," Colt admitted. "But Dutch says we need overwhelming evidence and multiple witnesses. If we can coordinate everyone speaking up at the same time, Hale can't silence them all without looking like exactly what he is. And if he decides looking like a murderer is acceptable, then a lot of people die, including us." Colt checked his gun, habit more than necessity. "But at least we'll die fighting instead of waiting for him to come take what's ours." May nodded slowly. "My husband used to say something similar, that some things are worth dying for, even if you'd rather live." "Your husband was a smart man. Smart enough to get himself killed. Smart enough to marry you and trust you'd finish what he started. That counts for something." They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. May sent Thomas to discreetly pass messages to Webb and Catherine Brennan. Colt retrieved the reorganized evidence from Dutch's barber shop and brought it to the church basement, along with Ridley's files. By the time darkness fell, they'd transformed the dusty underground space into a makeshift war room, with documents spread across old tables and candles providing flickering light. People started arriving in 1s and 2s, slipping through the back entrance of the church like conspirators in some revolution. Marcus Webb came first, bringing 2 other freighters who'd agreed to testify about Hale, forcing them to transport stolen goods. Catherine Brennan arrived with a middle-aged couple Colt didn't recognize. The husband had lost his ranch to one of Hale's forged debt claims. Dutch Kellerman showed up carrying his old Pinkerton case files, looking more alert than Colt had ever seen him. Even Sheriff Ridley appeared, sober and clean-shaven for the first time since Colt had met him, wearing his badge like he'd remembered what it meant. In total, 14 people gathered in that church basement. 14 people willing to risk everything to stand against Vernon Hale. It wasn't an army. It wasn't even a particularly impressive group. But it was something. Colt stood at the front of the room, looking at their faces, scared, determined, angry, hopeful, and tried to figure out how to turn this collection of frightened citizens into a force that could challenge a man with guns and money and power. "Thank you all for coming," he started. "I know this is dangerous. I know most of you would rather be home with your families, pretending everything's fine. But pretending hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. For 2 years, Vernon Hale has stolen from this town, killed anyone who resisted, and corrupted every official who might have stopped him. That ends now." "How?" someone called from the back. "He's got armed men. He's got the law. What do we have?" "We have the truth," Dutch said, stepping forward, "and documentation to prove it. Forged deeds, fake debts, falsified records. I've analyzed 17 separate cases of fraud, and that's just what May Carter's husband managed to gather before Hale killed him. There's probably more." Catherine Brennan spoke up. "Truth doesn't stop bullets. My students need me alive more than they need me to be a hero." "Nobody's asking you to be a hero," Colt said. "We're asking you to be a witness, to stand up publicly and say what happened to you, to your families, to this town, all of us together at the same time in front of everyone." "Where?" Ridley asked. "Hale controls most of the public spaces in Black Cinder." "Then we make our own space. Tomorrow, we call a town meeting, ring the church bell, gather everyone in the street, make it so public that Hale can't shut it down without showing his hand. He'll just have his men disperse the crowd," Webb said. "Maybe, but we'll have witnesses, people who'll see him using violence to silence testimony. And we'll make sure word gets out to the territorial governor, to federal marshals, to newspapers in Denver and Santa Fe. The more public this is, the harder it is for Hale to make it disappear." May stood. "My husband gathered evidence for months. He was careful, methodical, smart, and Hale still killed him. What makes you think being public will protect us when being careful didn't protect him?" Colt had been expecting this question. He'd been asking himself the same thing since leaving Hale's ranch. "Your husband worked alone," he said. "Tried to build a case in secret, probably planning to present it once it was complete. That gave Hale time to find out what he was doing and stop him before the evidence went public. We're doing the opposite. We're making everything public immediately, before Hale has time to kill all of us. It's riskier, messier, but it's also harder to stop." "But it's what?" "He could kill you tonight," the rancher pointed out. "Kill all of us before we get a chance to hold this meeting." "He could," Colt admitted, "but I don't think he will, not yet. Hale tried to buy me off today, which means he's still trying to control this situation through manipulation instead of violence. He'll wait to see if I leave town. Give it another day, maybe 2. That's our window." Ridley crossed his arms. "And what happens at this public meeting? We all stand up and accuse Vernon Hale of crimes? Then what?" "Then we demand justice. Demand that territorial authorities investigate. Demand that federal marshals get involved. Put so much pressure on the corrupt local officials that they have to act or expose themselves as Hale's puppets." "That's a lot of demanding with nothing to back it up." "We have evidence," Dutch said, gesturing at the tables covered in documents. 17 proven cases of fraud. Witness testimony about intimidation and violence. Financial records showing Hale's network of corruption. It's not perfect, but it's enough to raise serious questions." Catherine shook her head. "Questions aren't justice. Questions are just the beginning of a long legal process that Hale will manipulate at every step." "You're right," Colt said. "Which is why we need something else. Something that forces action instead of just questions." "Like what?" May asked. Colt had been thinking about this all afternoon, turning over possibilities and discarding them as too risky or too complicated. But one idea kept coming back, dangerous as it was. "We force Hale to come to the meeting, make him defend his claims publicly, in front of witnesses, put him in a position where he either admits to fraud or has to produce documentation proving his deeds are legitimate." "He won't come," Webb said. "Why would he?" "Because if he doesn't, It looks like an admission of guilt. And if he does come, we have him on record defending forged documents. Either way, we win. Or he shoots everyone and burns the evidence, someone muttered. That's possible, Colt acknowledged, which is why we need insurance. Before the meeting, we send copies of all this evidence to the territorial governor, the federal land office, newspapers in 3 cities. If Hale kills us, the evidence still goes public. He can't bury it. Ridley looked impressed despite himself. That might actually work. Not perfectly, but enough to cause him real problems. The meeting continued for another hour, people asking questions, raising concerns, slowly coming around to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they could actually challenge Vernon Hale and survive. It wasn't unanimous. 2 people left partway through, too scared to continue, but the others stayed, and by the time they dispersed into the night, they had the skeleton of a plan. Tomorrow, they'd send copies of the evidence out of town with trusted messengers. The day after, they'd ring the church bell and call a public meeting. They'd present their case in the street, in front of everyone, and dare Vernon Hale to respond. It was a terrible plan with 100 ways to fail, but it was the best chance they had. Colt walked May home through dark streets, his hand near his gun, his eyes watching for any sign of Hale's men. The town was quiet, but it felt like the quiet before a storm, charged and waiting. Do you think it'll work? May asked as they reached her store. I think we're about to find out if courage is stronger than fear. And if it's not, then we die knowing we tried. That's more than most people can say. May looked at him in the darkness, her face barely visible in the starlight. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both, Colt said. She smiled, sad and tired. Thank you for everything, even if it ends badly. It hasn't ended yet. He waited until she was safely inside before heading back to the boarding house. Tomorrow they'd start setting everything in motion. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, Black Cinder slept uneasily, caught between the fear of what had been and the terrifying possibility of what might be. And somewhere in his ranch house, Vernon Hale was probably planning how to crush this resistance before it grew strong enough to threaten him. The race was on. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that felt too peaceful for what was coming. Colt was awake before the sun, packing copies of evidence into saddlebags for the 3 riders who'd volunteered to carry documentation out of town. Marcus Webb had arranged for his most trusted freighters to make runs to Santa Fe, Denver, and the nearest federal marshal's office, each carrying identical packets of forged deeds, witness statements, and Dutch's meticulous analysis of Hale's fraud operation. You sure about this? One of the riders asked as Colt handed over the sealed documents. The man was young, maybe 25, with the nervous energy of someone who understood he was about to become a target. I'm not sure about anything, Colt said honestly. But if we don't get this evidence out of Black Cinder before the meeting tomorrow, Hale will destroy it along with everyone who knows what's in it. And if his men stop us on the road, then you tell them you're making a normal freight run. The documents are hidden in false bottoms under legitimate cargo. Even if they search the wagons, they probably won't find them. Probably ain't a guarantee. Nothing's guaranteed except that doing nothing gets us all killed slower. Colt gripped the young man's shoulder. You're doing the right thing. Your name's going to be remembered when this is over. I'd rather be alive and forgotten than dead and famous. Wouldn't we all? The riders departed at first light, their wagons loaded with goods that gave them legitimate reasons to be traveling. Colt watched them disappear down 3 different roads and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. If Hale had scouts watching the trails, if his men decided to search thoroughly, if any of the riders talked under pressure, any of those things could doom the whole plan before it started. But sitting still guaranteed failure. Movement at least gave them a chance. By mid-morning, word had spread through Black Cinder that something was happening. People whispered in corners, cast nervous glances at each other, wondered if the rumors were true about a public meeting to challenge Vernon Hale. The church bell hadn't rung yet. That would come tomorrow. But the tension in the air made it feel like the town was holding its breath. Colt found Sheriff Ridley at his office, sober for the 2nd day in a row, and looking almost like the lawman he used to be. The badge on his vest was polished, his gun belt properly buckled, his eyes clear instead of clouded with whiskey. Never thought I'd see you clean up, Colt said. Never thought I'd have a reason to. Ridley was loading rifles from the office armory, checking mechanisms and ammunition. Figured if I'm going to die tomorrow, might as well die doing my job instead of drowning in a bottle. You don't have to be there. Could leave town tonight. Nobody would blame you. I'd blame me. Ridley set down a rifle and met Colt's eyes. I let 3 good deputies die while I sat here doing nothing. Let families get destroyed while I looked the other way. Let this town turn into Hale's personal kingdom because I was too scared to stand up. His voice went rough. I can't change what I didn't do, but I can show up tomorrow and remember what this badge used to mean. It might get you killed. I've been dead for 2 years. Just been too much of a coward to admit it. Ridley went back to loading rifles. At least this way I'll die like a lawman instead of a drunk. Colt left him there and headed to the trading post, where May and Dutch were organizing the final presentation of evidence. They'd arranged everything chronologically, by property, by type of fraud, creating a narrative that even people without legal training could follow. Dutch's Pinkerton experience showed in the precision of the documentation, every claim supported by multiple sources, every accusation backed by hard proof. This is good work, Colt said, reviewing the organized files. It's 2 years too late, May replied, but there was steel in her voice instead of regret. My husband should have lived to see this. So should everyone else Hale killed. They'll see it through what we do tomorrow. Their evidence, their sacrifice, their refusal to just surrender. All of it matters because we're finishing what they started. Thomas appeared from the back room, carrying a box of his father's personal effects. The boy had been quieter than usual, processing everything that was about to happen. He set the box on the counter and pulled out a leather journal. Dad kept notes, Thomas said, about everything he was investigating. I thought maybe they'd help. May's hand trembled as she took the journal. She opened it to a random page and her eyes filled with tears at the familiar handwriting. May 3rd, met with Samuel Ortega today. He confirmed that Hale's men threatened to burn his stable a 3rd time if he didn't sell. Sam's leaving for Santa Fe next week. Can't say I blame him, but every person who leaves makes it harder to build a case. Need more witnesses, need more proof, need more courage than I've got. She closed the journal carefully. He thought he wasn't brave enough. Thought he was failing because people kept leaving and he couldn't stop them. He was brave enough, Colt said. He just didn't live long enough to see it pay off. They worked through the afternoon, preparing arguments and organizing speakers for tomorrow's meeting. Catherine Brennan would present testimony from families who'd lost property. Marcus Webb would detail the intimidation and violence he'd witnessed. Dutch would explain the forensic evidence of forgery. And May would tell her husband's story, how he'd uncovered the fraud, how he'd gathered proof, how he'd been killed for trying to do the right thing. It was a strong case, maybe even strong enough to force territorial authorities to act, if they survived long enough to present it. As evening approached, Colt walked the perimeter of town, studying sightlines and escape routes. Tomorrow's meeting would take place in the street in front of the church, the most open public space in Black Cinder. That openness cut both ways, made it harder for Hale to attack without witnesses, but also made it harder to defend if he decided violence was worth the exposure. He was marking potential defensive positions when a voice spoke from the shadows. You're planning for a battle. Colt spun, hand on his gun, then relaxed slightly when he recognized the speaker. Ray Cutler stepped out of an alley, alone and unarmed, his hands held away from his sides in a gesture of non-aggression. What do you want, Ray? To give you some advice. Man to man, off the record. I'm listening. Ray moved closer, keeping his hands visible. Up close, Colt could see that the enforcer looked tired, older than his years. I've worked for Vernon Hale for 4 years. Seen him build his empire one stolen property at a time. I've threatened people, beaten them, burned their homes. I've done things I ain't proud of because the pay was good and I told myself it wasn't personal. That's supposed to make me feel sorry for you? No. Just explaining context. Ray leaned against a wall. Here's the thing. Hale knows about your meeting tomorrow, knows you sent evidence out of town, knows exactly what you're planning. Colt's blood went cold. How? Because he's got people everywhere. Scared people who report to him to keep themselves safe. Probably someone in your little resistance group told him everything. Then he'll attack before we can present the evidence. That's what I'd do if I was him. Come at you tonight or early tomorrow, kill the leaders, scatter the witnesses, burn the documents. Quick and brutal, make sure nobody else gets ideas about standing up. Why are you telling me this? Ray was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Because I'm tired. tired of being the monster in other people's nightmares, tired of helping a man steal everything from people who can't fight back. He met Colt's eyes. That boy, May Carter's son, he looked at me yesterday like I was the devil himself. And the thing is, he wasn't wrong. So you want redemption? Little late for that. Maybe. But I figure dying while trying to do one right thing beats living while doing 100 wrong ones. Ray straightened. Hale's planning to hit the church basement tonight. Figures that's where you're keeping the evidence and where people will gather. He's sending 8 men. I'm supposed to lead them. And instead you're warning me. Instead I'm warning you. And then I'm leaving town tonight, getting as far from Vernon Hale as I can manage. Maybe I'll get killed for betraying him. Maybe not. But at least I won't have to look at any more scared kids and know I'm the reason they're scared. Colt studied the man who'd dragged May into the street less than a week ago, trying to read truth from deception. Ray could be lying, setting a trap, trying to manipulate him into making a mistake. But the exhaustion in his voice sounded genuine. The self-loathing felt real. When's the attack supposed to happen? Midnight. They'll burn the church with everyone inside, make it look like an accident. Oil lamps, old building, tragic fire. By morning, there will be nothing left but ashes and bodies nobody can identify. And if I evacuate the church? Move everyone somewhere else? Then you've got maybe a day before Hale figures out I warned you and comes at you harder. But a day's better than dying tonight. Ray turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you win. Hope you burn his whole empire to the ground. He deserves it. Ray, Colt's voice stopped him. You're right. About choosing to do one right thing. It matters. Doesn't make up for the wrong ones. No, but it's a start. Ray disappeared into the gathering darkness, and Colt stood alone trying to decide if he'd just been given a gift or walked into an elaborate trap. Either way, he couldn't risk assuming Ray was lying. Too many lives depended on taking the warning seriously. He ran to the trading post and found May closing up for the night. We need to move everyone he said without preamble. Now. Within an hour, they'd evacuated the church basement and relocated to Marcus Webb's freight warehouse on the edge of town. It wasn't ideal, harder to defend, easier to surround, but Hale's men wouldn't be expecting them there. The 14 people who'd committed to standing against Hale gathered in the dusty warehouse, surrounded by crates and barrels, while Colt explained what Ray had told him. Could be a trap, Dutch said immediately. Could be, Colt agreed. But if it's not, and we ignore the warning, we all burn tonight. And if we're here and Hale's men attack anyway, then at least we see them coming instead of dying in our sleep. They posted guards at every entrance and settled in for a long night. Colt positioned himself near the main door with a clear view of the street, his rifle loaded and ready. Beside him, Sheriff Ridley checked his guns for the 3rd time. You believe him? Ridley asked. The enforcer who warned you? I believe people can surprise you. Believe that even men who've done terrible things can decide they want to stop. That's optimistic. That's human. We're all capable of change. Question is whether we're brave enough to actually do it. Midnight came and went with no attack on the warehouse. But around 12:30, a distant orange glow appeared in the direction of the church. Flames climbed into the night sky, and even from a distance they could hear the crackling roar of a building burning. Ray was telling the truth, May whispered. And we'd all be dead right now if he hadn't warned us, Catherine added. They watched the church burn, seeing in those flames what would have been their fate if one of Hale's enforcers hadn't found his conscience at the last possible moment. The fire department, such as it was, made a token effort to fight the blaze, but everyone knew the building was lost. By morning, it would be nothing but charred timber and ash. Hale will know we weren't inside, Webb said. Know someone warned us. Which means he'll come harder and faster, Colt replied. We can't wait for tomorrow's meeting. We need to move now, while we still can. It's the middle of the night. Nobody's awake to witness anything. Then we wake them up. Colt turned to Ridley. Sheriff, you still got authority to ring the emergency bell at the jail? For fires and disasters, yeah. This qualifies as both. Ring it. Get everyone in town out of their homes and into the street. We'll present our case right now while Hale's men are still at the church watching it burn. That's insane, Catherine said. We're not prepared. We don't have everything organized. We're prepared enough. And if we wait for perfect conditions, we'll be waiting until Hale kills us all. Colt grabbed the satchel containing their evidence. Dutch, You and May bring the documents. Catherine, you gather any witnesses who are willing to speak. Webb, you make sure people actually come when the bell rings. Tell them it's about the church fire. Tell them it's important. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. And what are you going to do? May asked. I'm going to the jail to make sure Ridley actually rings that bell and doesn't get shot for his trouble. They scattered into the night, moving quickly through dark streets toward their assigned tasks. Colt and Ridley reached the jail without incident and climbed to the small bell tower above the office. The emergency bell was designed to alert the town to fires, floods, or attacks, occasions when every citizen needed to wake up and respond immediately. Vernon Hale's 2-year reign of terror definitely qualified. Ridley grabbed the rope and looked at Colt. Once I ring this, there's no going back. Everyone in town will know something's happening. Good. Let them know. Let them see their sheriff finally doing his job. Ridley pulled the rope. The bell's deep clang shattered the night silence, echoing off buildings and rolling across Black Cinder like thunder. He rang it again, and again, and again. Each peal announcing that something was wrong, something required attention, something demanded that people stop hiding and pay attention. Lights began appearing in windows. Doors opened. People emerged into the street in nightclothes, confused and frightened, looking for smoke or flood or whatever catastrophe had triggered the emergency bell. What they found instead was a crowd gathering in front of the jail. May and Dutch arrived with arms full of documents. Catherine brought the witnesses who'd committed to speaking. Marcus Webb moved through the growing crowd, quietly telling people that this was about Vernon Hale, about justice, about the truth that had been buried for too long. Colt climbed onto the jail's porch, high enough to be seen by the crowd that now numbered over 100 people. He could see fear in their faces, confusion, anger at being woken in the middle of the night. But he could also see curiosity. 2 years of living under Hale's thumb had taught them that nothing good happened in Black Cinder, but maybe, just maybe, something was finally changing. I know you're scared, Colt called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. I know you want to go back to your homes and pretend everything's fine. But the church is burning tonight because Vernon Hale tried to kill everyone who was going to testify against him tomorrow. He failed. We're still here, and we're going to tell you the truth about what's been happening in this town. Who the hell are you? Someone shouted. Nobody important. Just a drifter who got tired of watching good people get hurt. Colt gestured to May, but she's important. May Carter, whose husband was murdered for gathering evidence of fraud. Dutch Kellerman, who spent 30 years as a Pinkerton investigator and knows fraud when he sees it. Sheriff Boone Ridley, who's finally remembered what his badge means. And a dozen other people who've lost everything to Vernon Hale's lies. The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily. Some people started to leave, too scared to be associated with open resistance. But most stayed, drawn by the promise of finally understanding what had been done to their town. Dutch stepped forward and began explaining the evidence in simple, clear terms. 17 properties stolen through forged documents, fake debts that never existed, signatures from dead men, a systematic operation to transfer land ownership using corruption and violence. Every word of this is documented, Dutch said, holding up thick folders. Copies have already been sent to the territorial governor, the federal land office, and newspapers in 3 cities. Even if something happens to us tonight, the truth is already out there. Lies, a voice shouted from the back of the crowd. Vernon Hale is a respected businessman. You can't prove any of this. The crowd parted and Colt's stomach sank as he recognized the speaker. One of Hale's lawyers, a weasel-faced man named Crawford, who'd probably been planted in the crowd to sow doubt. Behind Crawford, moving through the dispersing crowd like wolves, came more of Hale's men. 4, 6, 8 of them, hands on their guns, faces set with the grim determination of people following orders. And behind them all, mounted on a magnificent black horse and dressed like he was attending a formal dinner instead of a midnight confrontation, came Vernon Hale himself. The crowd fell silent as Hale rode slowly to the front, his eyes sweeping across the gathered citizens with the kind of casual contempt reserved for people who'd forgotten they were supposed to be afraid. He dismounted with theatrical precision and climbed the steps to face Colt directly. Mr. Mercer, Hale said, his voice carrying that same reasonable tone from their earlier meeting. This is quite the dramatic presentation. Midnight emergency bells, accusations of fraud, burning churches. You've certainly made an impression. Just telling the truth. Truth is a flexible concept. I have documents proving my ownership of every property in question. Legal documents, properly notarized and filed with the county clerk. If these people, he gestured dismissively at May and the others, want to contest my claims, they're welcome to do so in court. Like civilized people. Your documents are forgeries, Dutch called out. I've analyzed them. Different ink, inconsistent handwriting, signatures that don't match known samples from the supposed signatories. So you claim, but you're a retired barber with delusions of detective work, not a legal authority. I'm a former Pinkerton investigator with 30 years of experience identifying fraud. My analysis would hold up in any honest court. Hale smiled. Then I'm sure the territorial judge will give it all due consideration when these accusations eventually make their way through proper legal channels. In the meantime, this assembly is illegal. It's the middle of the night, you're disturbing the peace, and you're making wild accusations without evidence. We have evidence, May said, her voice shaking but determined. My husband died gathering it, and we're not going to let his death be for nothing. Your husband died in a tragic accident, Mrs. Carter. I'm sorry for your loss, but accidents happen. They don't constitute evidence of conspiracy. It wasn't an accident, and you know it. May's composure cracked. You killed him because he found out what you were doing, just like you killed Sheriff Ridley's deputies, just like you killed Marcus Webb's brother, just like you've killed everyone who tried to stand up to you. The crowd stirred at this, murmurs of agreement rippling through the gathered citizens. Colt could see the calculation in Hale's eyes. He was losing control of the narrative, losing the appearance of respectability he'd worked so hard to maintain, which made him more dangerous, not less. These are serious accusations, Hale said, his voice going cold. Accusations that border on slander. I've tried to be reasonable, tried to explain that I'm simply a businessman operating within the law. But if you insist on spreading lies and inciting unrest, we insist on justice, Ridley interrupted, stepping forward with his badge catching the lamplight. As the lawfully appointed sheriff of this county, I'm formally investigating complaints of fraud, intimidation, and murder. And I'm calling on you, Vernon Hale, to submit your property documents for official examination. Hale laughed. You? You're going to investigate me? The drunk who spent 2 years drowning in whiskey while I built an empire? The coward who let his deputies die without lifting a finger? Yeah, me. Ridley's hand moved to his gun. Because I finally remembered that wearing this badge means something. Means standing up to men like you even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when I'm terrified of what you'll do to me. Then you're a fool who's about to get himself killed. Maybe, but I'll die a lawman instead of a coward. That's worth something. The tension in the crowd thickened, everyone sensing that words were about to give way to violence. Hale's men shifted position, surrounding the jail steps, hands on weapons. Colt counted the odds. 8 armed enforcers plus Hale himself against Colt, Ridley, and whoever in the crowd was brave enough to fight. Bad odds, but not impossible. Then something unexpected happened. Thomas Carter stepped forward from where he'd been standing with his mother. The 10-year-old boy walked right up to Vernon Hale and looked him in the eye. You killed my father, Thomas said, his voice clear and unwavering. And you tried to kill my mother, and you tried to burn everyone in that church tonight. And you're standing here lying about it like we're all too stupid to know the truth. Hale looked down at the boy with undisguised contempt. Child, you should go home before you get hurt. I'm not going anywhere. You don't scare me anymore. Then you're even dumber than your father. Thomas's face flushed red, but he didn't back down. My father was smart enough to figure out what you were doing. Brave enough to gather evidence even though he knew you might kill him, and good enough to make my mother promise to finish what he started. You can kill all of us, but you can't kill the truth. It's already out there, and everyone's going to know what you are. Something shifted in the crowd at those words. Colt saw it happen. The way people's faces changed, the way they stopped looking at Hale with fear and started looking at him with something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. The realization that this powerful man who'd controlled their lives for 2 years was just a bully with money and guns. And bullies could be stopped if enough people refused to be afraid. One person stepped forward from the crowd, then another, then 5 more, then a dozen. Citizens of Black Cinder moving to stand between Hale's men and the people on the jail steps. Not armed, not threatening violence, just standing there in silent testimony that they'd had enough. Go home, Hale ordered, his voice sharp with the first hint of real anger. All of you, go home before this gets ugly. Nobody moved. I said go home! Hale's hand went to his gun, and his enforcers followed suit, 8 weapons appearing in 8 hands. And that's when Sheriff Boone Ridley did something he should have done 2 years ago. He drew his own gun and pointed it directly at Vernon Hale's chest. Under the authority of my office, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, intimidation, and suspicion of murder. You have the right to contest these charges in court, but right now you're coming with me to a cell. Hale's face went purple with rage. You can't arrest me. I own this town. I own you. You own the drunk I used to be, but that man died tonight, along with his fear. Ridley's gun didn't waver. Now you got a choice. Come peaceful and take your chances with the legal system you've been corrupting, or draw on me and find out if these citizens are willing to watch their sheriff get shot defending their town. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. 8 of Hale's men with guns drawn, Ridley with his weapon pointed at their boss, Colt with his hand on his own gun, ready to back whatever play Ridley made. And between them all, over 100 citizens of Black Cinder watching to see if courage was enough to overcome power. Then one of Hale's enforcers, a kid who looked barely old enough to shave, lowered his gun. I ain't dying for this, the kid said. Ain't worth it. He turned and walked away. Just like that. No dramatics, no speeches. Just a decision that his life mattered more than Vernon Hale's empire. Another enforcer followed, then a third. Within 30 seconds, 5 of Hale's 8 men had disappeared into the darkness, unwilling to kill or die for a man who'd only ever cared about himself. That left 3 loyal enforcers, all looking uncertain now that the odds had shifted. Hale himself stood frozen, his hand on his gun but not drawing, his face twisted with the kind of rage that came from watching everything you'd built crumble in front of you. This isn't over, Hale said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. You think arresting me changes anything? I have lawyers, I have connections, I have money. I'll be out of that cell before sunrise, and then you'll face a federal investigation, Dutch interrupted. Because evidence of your fraud is already on its way to Denver, already being reviewed by people who don't take bribes from land barons with delusions of grandeur. And you'll face witnesses, May added, people who are done being scared, done hiding, done letting you steal from them without fighting back. And you'll face me, Ridley said quietly, every single day until this gets resolved. I'll make sure you're charged properly, tried fairly, and sent to a prison cell if that's what justice requires. That's my job. That's what this badge means. Hale's remaining enforcers exchanged glances. Whatever loyalty they'd felt was evaporating in the face of their employer's obvious defeat. One by one, they holstered their weapons and stepped back, making it clear they wouldn't fight for a losing cause. Vernon Hale stood alone. For 2 years he'd owned this town through fear and corruption and the belief that power was all that mattered. Now he was learning what happened when people stopped being afraid, when they remembered that justice could be stronger than intimidation, when they realized that empires built on lies collapsed the moment enough people said no. I'll destroy all of you, Hale said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I'll ruin your lives. Take everything you have. Make you wish. You already took everything, May interrupted. Took my husband. Took my security. Took my belief that good things could happen in this world. The only thing you left me was the choice between surrendering or fighting back. And I choose fighting back. The crowd rumbled its agreement. Not everyone. Some people were still too scared, still too broken by 2 years of oppression. But enough people. Enough to matter. Enough to show that Black Cinder wasn't Hale's kingdom anymore. It was just a town that belonged to the people who lived in it. Ridley gestured with his gun. Cell's this way. You can go easy or you can go hard, but either way, you're going. Hale's shoulders slumped, and Colt saw the exact moment when the land baron realized he'd lost. Not just the confrontation, not just the town, but the entire carefully constructed fiction that he was invincible. He was just a man who'd be sleeping in a jail cell tonight while his empire burned down around him. Ridley escorted Hale into the jail with 2 citizens volunteering to stand guard outside, making sure no one tried to free him before dawn. The remaining enforcers scattered into the night, probably planning to be far away from Black Cinder before the federal marshals arrived. The crowd slowly dispersed, people returning to their homes with expressions that ranged from relief to disbelief to cautious hope. They'd stood up to Vernon Hale and survived, had watched their sheriff arrest him, had seen his men abandon him. It didn't solve everything. There'd still be trials, investigations, legal battles that would take months or years to fully resolve. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Black Cinder belonged to its citizens again. Colt found himself standing on the jail steps with May, Dutch, Catherine, and Marcus Webb. They looked exhausted, scared, and slightly stunned by what had just happened. "Did we actually do it?" Catherine asked. "Did we actually stop him?" "We started stopping him," Dutch corrected. "Still got a long road ahead, but yeah, we made it through tonight." "People are going to call us heroes," Webb said, sounding uncomfortable with the idea. "We're not heroes," May replied. "We're just people who got tired of being scared. That's not heroic. That's just human." Colt thought about that, about what it meant to be human in a world that rewarded fear and punished courage, about the choice between surviving and living, between hiding and fighting, between accepting the world as it was and insisting it could be better. His brother James had made that choice in the middle of a war, charging into a burning building to save people he'd never met. May's husband had made it while gathering evidence that would get him killed. Sheriff Ridley had made it tonight, pointing a gun at a man who terrified him. And a 10-year-old boy named Thomas had made it by looking evil in the eye and saying it didn't scare him anymore. Maybe that was what being human actually meant. Not being fearless, but being afraid and choosing to act anyway. Not being perfect, but trying to do right even when it was hard. Not being heroes, but being people who decided that some things mattered more than safety. The sun was starting to rise now, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The church still smoldered in the distance, its destruction a reminder of how close they'd come to dying tonight. But they'd survived. They'd fought back. They'd won, at least for now. "What happens next?" May asked. "Next, federal marshals show up and investigate," Colt said. "Next, trials happen and justice gets sorted out. Next, this town figures out how to rebuild without a tyrant controlling everything." "And what about you?" Colt looked at her, at the hope and fear and exhaustion in her face. Part of him wanted to stay, wanted to see this through, watch Black Cinder heal, maybe even be part of building something good instead of just tearing down something bad. But he was a drifter, always had been, probably always would be. Towns were places he passed through, not places he belonged. "I'll stick around until the marshals arrive, what?" he said. "Make sure Hale actually faces justice. After that, you'll ride off into the sunset like some character in a dime novel," May finished. She smiled sadly. "I understand. Men like you don't settle down. You blow into town, change everything, then disappear before anyone can thank you properly." "I don't need thanks." "Good, because I'm not grateful." At Colt's surprised expression, she continued, "I'm not grateful you came to Black Cinder. I'm grateful that when you saw something wrong, you decided to do something about it. There's a difference. One makes you special, the other just makes you human." She was right. Colt hadn't saved Black Cinder. The people of Black Cinder had saved themselves, with a little push from a stranger who'd reminded them that fighting back was possible. All he'd done was believe in them before they believed in themselves. Maybe that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Federal marshals arrived from Denver, bringing with them the documentation that had been sent ahead. They interviewed witnesses, examined evidence, and formally charged Vernon Hale with 17 counts of fraud, multiple counts of intimidation and assault, and 3 counts of murder in connection with deaths that had been ruled accidental, but now looked decidedly suspicious. Hale's lawyers showed up, expensive men in expensive suits who tried to get the charges dismissed on technicalities. But Dutch's meticulous documentation held up under scrutiny, and the sheer number of witnesses willing to testify made it impossible to dismiss the case as baseless accusations. Sheriff Ridley stayed sober, stayed focused, and started rebuilding the trust that had been destroyed during his 2 years of drunken cowardice. It would take time. People didn't forget that easily, but he was trying. That counted for something. May reopened her trading post and started the slow process of rebuilding her life. Thomas helped out after school, sweeping floors and stocking shelves the way his father had taught him. The boy seemed older now, more serious, but also lighter somehow. Like standing up to Vernon Hale had freed him from a weight he'd been carrying. Marcus Webb's freight business picked up as confidence returned to Black Cinder. Catherine Brennan's school saw enrollment increase as families that had fled started returning, drawn by news that the town was safe again. And Dutch Kellerman hung up his barber shears and accepted a temporary position as a special investigator for the territorial government, using his Pinkerton skills to help root out corruption in other frontier towns suffering under similar tyrants. Black Cinder wasn't perfect. It still had problems, still had scared people, still bore the scars of 2 years under Hale's control. But it was healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. On the morning Colt finally decided to leave, May was waiting outside the livery stable with a package wrapped in brown paper. "You were going to ride out without saying goodbye, weren't you?" she asked. "Seemed easier. For you or for me?" "Both." She handed him the package. "It's not much. Some food for the road, a letter of thanks from the town council, and something my husband would have wanted you to have." Colt unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was James Carter's journal, the one Thomas had brought out during their evidence gathering. The final page had been marked with a ribbon. He opened to it and read the last entry, dated 3 days before James Carter's death. "Sometimes I wonder if what I'm doing matters, if gathering all this evidence will actually change anything, or if I'm just making myself a target for no good reason. But then I think about Thomas, about the kind of world he'll inherit if good people don't fight back against evil, and I realize that whether I succeed or fail, trying is the only choice that lets me look my son in the eye and tell him courage matters. So I'll keep gathering evidence, keep documenting the truth, keep believing that somewhere, somehow, someone will use this information to make things right, even if it's not me, even if I don't live to see it. The truth matters. Justice matters. And fighting for both, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared, that's what separates humans from animals. That's what makes us worth saving." Colt closed the journal carefully, his throat tight. "He'd want you to have it," May said. "Want you to remember that what you did here mattered, that finishing what he started saved this town. I didn't finish it. You did. You and Thomas and Ridley and everyone else who found the courage to stand up. You showed us it was possible. That's worth remembering." Colt tucked the journal into his saddlebag alongside the food and the letter. He mounted his horse and looked down at May Carter, this widow who'd survived losing her husband and nearly losing everything else, who'd chosen to fight instead of surrender, who'd raised a son brave enough to stare down a tyrant. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too. And Colt, next time you ride into a town and see people being hurt, I hope you remember what happened here. Remember that trying matters, that sometimes impossible odds are just odds that nobody's bothered to challenge yet." "I'll remember." He rode north out of Black Cinder as the sun climbed higher in the sky, leaving behind a town that had learned to stand on its own. The road ahead was empty and uncertain, the way roads always were. But for the first time in a long time, Colt felt like he was moving towards something instead of just away from everything. Maybe that was what James Carter had meant in his final journal entry. Maybe courage wasn't about not being scared or even about succeeding. Maybe it was just about trying, about looking at injustice and deciding to fight it, even when failure seemed certain, about believing that doing the right thing mattered, even if nobody remembered your name afterward. Colt had spent 5 years drifting, trying to outrun the guilt of surviving when his brother hadn't, trying to forget that James had died saving people while Colt had lived by keeping his head down and not getting involved. But Black Cinder had taught him something, had shown him that James's death hadn't been meaningless sacrifice. It had been a choice to value other people's lives over his own safety. The same choice May's husband had made, the same choice Sheriff Ridley had finally made, the same choice a 10-year-old boy had made when he stood up to the man who'd killed his father. Being human meant having that choice, and choosing to act despite the fear, despite the risk, despite knowing you might fail. That was what separated surviving from living. Colt Mercer was done just surviving. The frontier stretched out before him, vast and uncertain, and full of towns that probably needed someone willing to stand up when standing up seemed impossible. He didn't know where he'd go next, didn't know what fights waited for him down the road. But he knew he'd show up when he got there, knew he'd try. And sometimes, trying was enough. Behind him, Black Cinder began another day. People opened shops, children walked to school, citizens started rebuilding what Vernon Hale had tried to destroy. The town wasn't perfect, wasn't saved forever, but it was free. And freedom, Colt had learned, wasn't a destination you reached and then defended. It was a choice you made every single day, a choice to stand up instead of kneel down, to speak truth instead of comfortable lies, to fight back instead of surrender. Black Cinder had made that choice, and somewhere down the road, Colt would help another town make it too. Because that's what being human meant. Not being perfect, not being fearless, just being willing to try. And trying, imperfect and uncertain as it was, made all the difference.